Hey there, tonight we're voyaging into the unforgiving world of ancient Viking ships. What you're about to discover is a far cry from the Hollywood saga, where the relentless North Sea was as much a foe as any enemy raider. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. You wake up to the sound of a hearty roar. Not a lion, mind you, but Olaf, the burly Viking who's been sharing the cramped, wooden quarters of a longship with you, and about 30 other unwashed warriors. You might expect a Viking ship to be all dragon heads and glory, but it's more like a floating barracks with less legroom than a budget airline. And don't even think about hitting the snooze button. Olaf's bellow is your morning alarm, and there's no negotiating with a man who can crush walnuts with his bare hands. Your nostrils are instantly assaulted by the smell of salted fish, which has become the signature scent of your Viking voyage. Breakfast is a simple affair. Dried fish, and maybe some rye bread if you're lucky, washed down with a swig of ale. Yes, ale for breakfast. Coffee hasn't been invented yet, and caffeine withdrawal is the least of your worries when you're about to face the North Sea. Forget about eggs Benedict or avocado toast. Your options are fish, fish, and more fish. Complaining is futile. Did you know that a Viking's daily caloric intake could top 4,000 calories? It's all those oars, not to mention the occasional raid. The longship itself is a marvel of engineering, if not comfort. At around 25 meters long and 5 meters wide, it's basically a narrow wooden bathtub, but with a sail. Designed for speed and versatility, it can navigate both open seas and shallow rivers, making it perfect for surprise invasions and quick getaways. But those sleek lines mean there's about as much personal space as a sardine in a tin. Privacy, forget it. You and your Viking pals sleep under the open sky or a makeshift canopy if the weather turns nasty. Hope you're not shy. The ship's design is ingenious, with clinker-built planks overlapping like fish scales, providing flexibility and strength to withstand the brutal ocean waves. And while it can carry up to 80 warriors, today you're part of a more modest crew. Lucky you. Less chance of someone rolling over and pinching your bread. The longship's shallow draft means it can land directly on beaches, making it the perfect vessel for the quick hit-and-run tactics that Vikings are famous for. And no, they didn't always wear those horned helmets. Sorry to burst your mythological bubble. With breakfast done, it's time for the morning routine, if you can call it that. There's no bathroom on board, but the ocean is conveniently nearby. A quick rinse, and you're ready to start the day. Hygiene is a bit of a luxury, and while Vikings are cleaner than their medieval counterparts, the communal living situation doesn't leave much room for modesty. A quick note. Personal grooming items have been found in Viking graves, so maybe they weren't as brutish as people think. Toothpicks, anyone. As you settle into the morning rhythm, you take a moment to appreciate the craftsmanship of the ship. It's not just a means of transport. It's a symbol of Norse power and ambition. The keel is the backbone, holding everything together, a fact that doesn't escape you when Olaf starts singing about the lifeblood of the sea. Poetry aside, it's a reminder that you're part of something bigger than just a seafaring adventure. You're living history, contributing to the saga of exploration and conquest that would see Vikings reach as far as Constantinople and North America. But let's not romanticize it too much. Life on a Viking ship is far from glamorous. The constant salt spray leaves your skin raw, and the relentless rowing is back-breaking work. Each oar is manned by 2 men, and you're expected to pull your weight, quite literally. With only a small wooden bench to call your own, comfort is a foreign concept, constantly damp, and the cold sea wind cuts through your tunic like a knife. It's a grueling way of life, but it's also exhilarating. The sense of camaraderie and shared purpose is palpable. You might wonder why anyone would choose this life. The answer is simple: opportunity. The Viking Age, which ran roughly from 793 to 1066 AD, was a time of expansion. Scandinavian lands were tough, with limited resources and arable land. Setting sail offered the chance for riches, land, and glory. And let's not forget the allure of treasure. Silver, gold, and the occasional thrall that's a slave for the uninitiated. Raids weren't just about pillaging. They were about securing a future. A successful raid could make you a wealthy man in a world where wealth meant power. Of course, the reality is a bit more complex. Viking society was hierarchical, with kings, earls, and freemen, and then those who were less free. Your place in this world dictates your role on the ship. The captain, or steersman, is in charge, and his word is law. But there's a certain democracy at play as well. Decisions often require consensus, and the crew's loyalty is crucial. It's a balance of power that keeps everything afloat, quite literally. And so, as the sun rises higher, you grab your oar and get ready for another day on the high seas. The horizon is endless, promising adventure, danger, and the possibility of something more. For now, though, it's just you, your crewmates, and the wide open ocean. But that's more than enough to keep your heart racing and your mind sharp. Besides, you'll need all your wits about you if you're to survive the day on this legendary yet unforgiving vessel. And as you grip your oar, feeling the rough wood bite into your palms, you quickly realize this isn't a leisurely paddle down the river. No, my friend, this is an all-out battle against the elements and your adversary, the unforgiving North Sea. The longship might be a marvel of Viking ingenuity, but it's also a relentless taskmaster. Designed for speed, these ships would also test the limits of human endurance. Each stroke is a testament to your willpower, not just your biceps. The longship's low profile cuts through waves, but that means you're often on the receiving end of icy sprays that make your morning shower feel like a warm hug. The physical demands are no joke. Rowing can burn around 500 calories an hour, and with shifts that could last up to 8 hours, it's no wonder Vikings had to pack away those 4,000 daily calories. And while you're cursing the sea spray, take solace in knowing this is a workout regime that would make a modern fitness guru weep with envy. Forget CrossFit. Viking rowing was the original extreme sport, minus the Instagram selfies. Just raw, relentless effort in the name of conquest and survival. The longship, though, is no ordinary vessel. Its clinker-built design, with overlapping planks, provides the flexibility needed to handle the unpredictable sea. This design is what allows the ship to flex and bend without snapping like a twig in a storm. An innovation that was light years ahead of its time. Ship's keel acts like a spine, keeping everything together. But here's the kicker. That brilliant design is also the reason you're feeling every wave in your bones. There's no cushioned seat or ergonomic handle here. Just you, your oar, and the vast, indifferent ocean. Now, speaking of things that seem great in legend but are brutal in reality, let's talk hierarchy. The romantic notion of Vikings as egalitarian warriors is about as factual as those horned helmets. The truth is, Viking society was as stratified as a layer cake, with clear roles and responsibilities. The steersman, often an experienced warrior or noble, called the shots. You know, the guy who gets to stand at the back and look heroic while you do the grunt work. Beneath him, you've got the seasoned warriors, the freemen, and then the thralls, basically the enslaved or the very unlucky. Each role had its place on the ship. The more experienced you were, the closer you'd be to the prow, or front of the ship. It was a status symbol as much as it was a practical necessity. These guys were the first to engage in battle. Meanwhile, you'd be somewhere in the middle, trying to keep pace with Olaf's relentless rowing. And yes, there's a twisted sort of democracy at play here. While decisions often required group consensus, it was more of a speak now or forever hold your peace type of arrangement. You could voice your opinion, sure, but if it didn't align with the steersman's, well, tough luck. And while we're debunking myths, let's address the egalitarian lifestyle on board. The truth, it was more like a mobile version of Downton Abbey, minus the tea and polite conversation. Social mobility was possible, but it wasn't a given. If you wanted to rise through the ranks, you'd better bring something to the table, like exceptional rowing skills, combat prowess, or a knack for navigating the stars. Even in the midst of a raid, the hierarchy was clear. The spoils of war were divided according to rank, with the steersman taking the lion's share. Your cut would be considerably smaller unless you managed to distinguish yourself in battle. The longship was a microcosm of Viking society, a floating manifestation of their cultural values, strength, bravery, and a healthy respect for the chain of command. Despite the harsh conditions, there was a sense of camaraderie born from shared hardship and mutual dependence. After all, survival in the North Sea required teamwork, and the knowledge that a single weak link could doom the entire crew. So, as you row and row and row some more, you begin to appreciate the balance of efficiency and exhaustion that defines the longship. This sleek vessel, designed for swift raids and rapid retreats, was both an engineering marvel and a grueling crucible. It was the key to Viking expansion, enabling them to strike fear into the hearts of coastal villages across Europe. But it was also a test of human endurance, pushing its crew to the limits of their strength and resolve. As the day wears on, the rhythm of rowing becomes almost meditative. The sea stretches endlessly before you, a vast expanse of opportunity and danger. You find yourself contemplating the bigger picture, the economic context that drove these voyages, the political landscape that shaped them, and the social structures that maintained them. The Viking Age was not just about raids and riches. It was a complex tapestry of ambition and survival. And as the sun inches toward the horizon, casting a golden glow over the restless waves, you realize that life on a Viking ship is a delicate dance between legend and reality. It's a saga written in sweat and salt, where every stroke of the oar is a step toward an uncertain future. But for now, it's just you, your crewmates, and the relentless rhythm of the sea, a rhythm that will carry you into the next chapter of this epic journey. And so, as the sun glares down like an impatient overseer, you're forced to reckon with the midday challenges that paint a less than glamorous picture of Viking life. The romanticized vision of fearless Norse explorers cutting through the waves like they are on a jaunty cruise is about to meet its harsh reality. The North Sea isn't a postcard, it's a ferocious beast, and today it seems particularly keen on making its presence felt. Those waves that looked so majestic from the safety of shore, they're now your nemesis, slapping against the hull with a rhythm that feels more spiteful than serene. Navigating these waters is another matter entirely. Forget GPS or even the trusty compass. It's the 9th century, and you're relying on techniques that would make a modern mariner break out in a cold sweat. The Vikings had a keen eye for natural signs, using the sun's position, the stars, wind patterns, and even the flight of seabirds as their guides. During the day, the sun compass, a simple wooden disc with a central pin, would cast shadows to help determine direction. At night, they'd look to the stars, particularly the North Star, to keep their course true. Sound easy? Hardly. Try it without your smartphone and see how far you get. But don't be too quick to scoff at their methods. These guys were the original survivalists, making Bear Grylls look like he's on a weekend camping trip. The sun compass, for instance, was rudimentary but effective, especially when the weather cooperated. But if clouds rolled in, obscuring the sun or stars, well, let's just say it added a bit of unwelcome excitement to the journey. It's a bit like being told you've got a map. But oh, by the way, half the time it's going to be written in invisible ink. And speaking of weather, let's talk about that brutal North Sea climate, a term that feels like an understatement. Think bone-chilling winds, towering waves, and the constant threat of storms that could turn your longship into splinters faster than you can say, Valhalla. It's this relentless barrage of nature's worst that keeps the crew on edge. Remember, this isn't some leisurely Mediterranean cruise. It's more like an extreme endurance test in a wooden roller coaster with no seatbelts. Now, while you're busy battling the elements, you might wonder why you're out here in the first place. Sure, the thrill of adventure and the promise of riches are enticing, but there's a more pressing, less glamorous reason: economics. Viking expeditions were driven by a need for resources and wealth. Scandinavia, while breathtaking, wasn't exactly bursting with fertile land or abundant resources. If you wanted to make a name for yourself, or more importantly, a living, you had to look beyond your borders. The economic stakes were high. A successful voyage could mean enough silver, gold, or other loot to elevate your status back home. But the risks were equally daunting. An ill-fated journey could leave you with nothing but a sodden cloak and a grudge against the sea. The lure of trade and plunder was potent, but it was tempered by the reality that not all voyages ended in triumph. In fact, many ended with a quiet slip beneath the waves, the ocean claiming yet another over-ambitious crew. Viking society, despite its fearsome reputation, was acutely aware of these risks. That's why these voyages were often meticulously planned, with the spoils of success being divided according to strict social hierarchies. The steersman, as the expedition leader, took the largest share, while you, a humble rower, would receive a portion that reflected your place in the pecking order. It's a system that ensured loyalty, but also reinforced the rigid social structure that defined Viking life. But let's not forget the romance of it all. The allure of setting sail into the unknown, of discovering new lands and forging new paths, was undeniably powerful. It's this duality between the legend and the stark reality that paints the true picture of Viking exploration. They were both the fearless warriors of saga and the pragmatic traders and settlers of history. These voyages were as much about survival and opportunity as they were about conquest and glory. As the day drags on and the sun creeps toward the horizon, you begin to feel the weight of the journey, not just in your aching muscles, but in your mind. The North Sea doesn't just test your physical endurance, it challenges your spirit, your resolve. It's a crucible that separates the dreamers from the doers, the legendary from the forgot. And as you look around at your fellow crewmen, you realize that each of them is here for a reason, driven by a desire to carve out their own piece of history, however small it might be. So, as the longship presses on, cutting through the waves with a determination that belies its fragile appearance, you settle into the rhythm of the oars, the pulse of the sea. There's no room for complacency here, only the constant push forward, toward whatever fate the horizon holds. And as the sea spray kisses your face, cold and bracing, you understand why the sagas speak of these voyages not just as journeys, but as tests of character, as defining moments in a life marked by the relentless pursuit of something greater. And while you row, guided by little more than instinct and the occasional break in the clouds, you realize that this is more than just a voyage. It's a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. It's a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, there's a drive to explore, to understand, to conquer not just land, but the very limits of what it means to be a Viking. These are the stories that echo through time, not because they're easy or glamorous, but because they're real, raw, and undeniably human. As the day's light begins to fade, you steel yourself for the night ahead, knowing that the challenges of navigation and weather are far from over. But in this moment, with the sea stretching out endlessly before you, there's a sense of purpose that binds you to your crewmates, to the ship, and to the very spirit of exploration itself. It's a reminder that while the legends may paint a picture of fearlessness, the reality is far more complex and infinitely more compelling. As the shadows lengthen and the horizon dips into twilight, the camaraderie on the longship becomes a living, breathing entity. It's a bit like being part of an exclusive club, except the membership card is an oar, and the initiation involves a fair amount of sea spray. You're all in this together, bonded by the shared hardship of rowing and the ever-present promise, or threat, of battle. But don't let the camaraderie fool you into thinking it's all warm hugs and high fives. This is a Viking ship, not a feel-good movie. In truth, tensions simmer beneath the surface like a pot ready to boil over. You're crammed into a space smaller than a New York studio apartment with 30 other men, some of whom are as prickly as porcupines with sunburns. Imagine spending weeks with the same faces, the same smells, and the same conversations. It's enough to drive anyone to the brink. And yet, this crucible of personalities is what forges the crew's unity, a unity born not from choice, but necessity. It's a delicate balance of personalities. The seasoned warriors with their tales of previous raids, the young bucks eager to prove themselves, and the thralls, who quite frankly don't have much of a choice. Each has their role, their place in this floating society. The older warriors command respect, their stories serving as both cautionary tales and rallying cries. They'll regale you with tales of raids on the English coast, strategic triumphs, and the occasional narrow escape, peppered with warnings about complacency and the ever-present specter of betrayal. Ah yes, betrayal, the uninvited guest at every Viking feast. Trust is a currency as valuable as silver and just as easily squandered. The constant threat of violence, whether from the sea or other ships, means that every man must watch his own back. You might share a laugh with Olaf over a mug of ale, but you'd be wise to keep one eye on your coin purse. Loyalty is earned, not given. And in a world where alliances shift like the tides, it pays to be wary. The psychological strain of long voyages is no joke. You're navigating not only the physical challenges of the sea, but also the mental gymnastics of life on board. Picture this. You've got no Netflix to binge, no social media to scroll through, and the closest thing to a spa is a bucket of cold seawater. Entertainment consists of songs, stories, and the occasional wrestling match, assuming you're not nursing a bruised rib from the last one. The monotony can be mind-numbing, a fact that isn't lost on you when you find yourself counting the knots in the ship's wood just to pass the time. It's little wonder that Vikings turned to storytelling as both an art and a survival tool. These sagas weren't just for entertainment. They were morale boosters, a way to remind everyone of their shared goals and the glory that awaited them. But remember, these aren't bedtime stories. They're gritty, raw, and often serve as a stark reminder of the stakes involved. Speaking of stakes, let's tackle the myth of the fearless Viking raid. Hollywood would have you believe that these raids were all about brute force, horned helmets, and pillaging with abandon. The reality, far more strategic and less glamorous. You see, raiding wasn't just about bashing down doors and grabbing the nearest gold goblet. It required careful planning, reconnaissance, and a keen understanding of the political landscape. Vikings were shrewd operators, often targeting wealthy but poorly defended monasteries and villages. Why attack a fortified town when a coastal settlement offers easier pickings? It's like choosing between robbing a fortress and a lemonade stand. One is clearly less risky. And let's not forget the element of surprise. Longships were built for stealth as much as speed, their shallow drafts allowing them to navigate rivers and appear seemingly out of nowhere. The raids themselves were swift, calculated affairs. A successful raid wasn't just a test of brawn, but of brains. The goal was to hit hard, hit fast, and get out before the local militia could mount a defense. And while treasure was a tempting prize, the real jackpot was often captives, people who could be ransomed back to their families or sold at trading ports. It was a brutal economic reality, but one that underpinned the Viking economy. But don't mistake these raids for mindless violence. There was a method to the madness, a strategic calculus that made the difference between a profitable expedition and a watery grave. Each raid was a gamble, a high-stakes game where the players risked life and limb for the promise of wealth and glory. And while the sagas might paint these ventures in epic terms, the truth was often more mundane. Logistical challenges, unpredictable weather, and the ever-present threat of counterattack. The allure of Viking raids lies in their duality, at once romanticized and ruthless. Yes, there's a certain saga-worthy appeal to the image of fierce warriors descending upon a foreign shore. But peel back the legend, and you'll find the grit and grind of real men facing real dangers, driven by necessity as much as ambition. It's this tension between myth and reality that continues to captivate us, a reminder that history is rarely as simple as it seems. As night falls, you're acutely aware of the shifting dynamics on the ship. The camaraderie and tension, the shared stories and silent suspicions, all form a delicate tapestry that could unravel at any moment. You're navigating not just the sea, but the intricate web of human relationships, where loyalty and rivalry exist side by side. And as the stars begin to twinkle above, guiding your journey through the darkness, you realize that this voyage, like the ones before it, is a test of endurance, strategy, and the unyielding will to carve out your place in history. So here you are, a humble rower on a Viking longship, caught in the push and pull of history itself. The sea whispers its secrets, the wind carries tales of distant lands, and you find yourself a part of this grand narrative, a living thread in the tapestry of the Viking Age. The challenges are many, the rewards uncertain, but the journey is where the true adventure lies. And as you brace yourself for what tomorrow may bring, you know that this is only the beginning, an epic saga that will continue to unfold with each stroke of the oar, each crest of the wave, and each decision made beneath the vast, indifferent sky. So, as you settle into the evening, you might think the hardest part of your Viking day is behind you. But think again. The sun has finally dipped below the horizon, and the North Sea transforms into a shadowy expanse, with the waves whispering secrets in a language only the truly intrepid or the truly foolish would dare to decipher. But here's the kicker. Nightfall is when the real challenge begins. You see, the longship doesn't come with a built-in rest mode. There are no cozy cabins or bunk beds, no soft pillows or warm blankets. Instead, you have a choice between the wooden plank beneath you or the open sky above you. Sound enticing. It's about as comfy as sleeping on a floor full of Lego bricks during a snowstorm. The ship's floor is your mattress, the night air your blanket, and your fellow crewmate snores the lullaby that'll cradle you to sleep if you're lucky. But before you can even think about catching some shut-eye, there's the small matter of night watch. Constant vigilance is the name of the game when you're out here. Remember, you're not on a pleasure cruise. Viking expeditions were fraught with danger, not just from the elements, but from potential rivals and enemies lurking in the dark, eager to turn your ship into kindling. So, you draw the short straw and find yourself peering into the Inkai void, eyes straining to discern friend from foe. The darkness, of course, doesn't just hide threats. It plays tricks on your mind. Every shadow becomes a phantom ship, every splash a harbinger of doom. It's a test of nerves as much as it is a test of endurance, a reminder that in the Viking world, peace is a mirage, constantly shifting and elusive. The nights are long, and the mind tends to wander. You think about the bigger picture, the broader impact of these voyages beyond just plunder and glory. Viking expeditions weren't just about raiding. They were also about trade, establishing connections that would transform the economic landscape of Europe. The Vikings didn't just plunder silver and gold. They brought back silk from Byzantium, spices from the east, and furs from the north. They were the connectors of the ancient world, linking disparate cultures through a web of commerce and exchange. It's the kind of globalization that would make even the most seasoned Wall Street trader nod in approval. These expeditions also had significant political ramifications. Viking raids and settlements reshaped the political map of Europe, leading to the formation of new kingdoms and the fall of old ones. England, for instance, experienced a series of Viking invasions that culminated in the Danelaw, a region under Norse control. And let's not forget Normandy, a gift from the French king to a Viking leader named Rollo, which would one day produce William the Conqueror. The Vikings weren't just visitors. They were architects of change, often leaving behind a legacy that would echo through the centuries. But here's the thing. Despite their significant impact, the Vikings are often remembered through a romanticized lens. Fearsome, adventurous, maybe a little bit reckless. It's the stuff of legend, sure, but it glosses over the gritty, unglamorous truth of their existence. The reality was harsh, and the stakes were high. Life on a longship was a relentless grind, a test of endurance both physical and mental. It was about survival, not swagger. As you sit there, contemplating the vastness of the sea and the smallness of your role in this grand narrative, you realize that the true story of the Vikings isn't just one of conquest and adventure. It's a story of resilience, of adapting to the harshest conditions and still finding a way to thrive. It's about pushing the boundaries of what's possible and redefining the very notion of exploration. So, as the night wears on, you understand that the legacy of the Vikings isn't just in the lands they conquered or the wealth they amassed. It's in the spirit of curiosity and determination, the drive to explore new horizons and forge new paths, even when the odds are stacked against you. It's a reminder that history isn't a static tapestry of events. It's a living, breathing saga, shaped by those who dared to challenge the status quo. And as you finally manage to steal a few moments of rest, lulled by the rhythmic sway of the ship and the distant call of the sea, you know that you're part of something much larger than yourself. You're a small thread in the vast tapestry of the Viking Age, a witness to the relentless pursuit of exploration and the indomitable human spirit. It's a tale that's been told for centuries, and one that will continue to inspire those who seek to push beyond the known and into the realm of the possible. With the dawn comes a new day, and with it, the promise of new challenges and new opportunities. As the first light of morning breaks over the horizon, you rise, ready to face whatever lies ahead. For in the world of the Vikings, the journey is never truly over. It's just another chapter waiting to be written. And as you take up your oar once more, you realize that the adventure is only just beginning, a testament to the enduring legacy of the Viking spirit. Alexander the Great was a bit like a rock star of the ancient world, a charismatic leader with a knack for conquering and a penchant for dying young. In 332 BC, he rolled into Egypt, not quite on a tour bus, but with an army that made the locals sit up and take notice. Egypt, with its sprawling deserts and the life-giving Nile, was the glittering jewel in the crown of his rapidly expanding empire. Alexander was welcomed as a liberator, because who doesn't love a hero smashing the chains of Persian overlords? But the post-conquest honeymoon was short-lived. Fast forward to 323 BC, and our boy Alex shuffles off this mortal coil at the ripe old age of 32, leaving behind a messy empire and an even messier succession plan. Spoiler alert, there wasn't one. Enter the Diadachi, a term that sounds like a fancy Italian dish, but actually refers to Alexander's generals, who started squabbling like siblings, fighting over inheritance. This isn't just any inheritance, mind you. This was an empire that spanned 3 continents. The contenders included Ptolemy, a savvy, perhaps slightly opportunistic, fellow who had been one of Alexander's trusted generals. Ptolemy was no stranger to the Game of Thrones, long before HBO made it cool. While his counterparts were busy cutting their teeth on Macedonian politics, Ptolemy set his sights on the land of the pharaohs. Why Egypt, you ask? Well, besides the obvious allure of pyramids and a solid tan, Egypt was an economic powerhouse. The Nile was the ancient equivalent of a cash cow, providing fertile land and a reliable food supply in a world where most people were one bad harvest away from disaster. Control the Nile, and you control the breadbasket of the ancient Mediterranean. Plus, Egypt had that strategic location, smack dab in the middle of trade routes between Africa, Asia, and Europe. It was the ancient world's version of prime real estate. The death of Alexander was like the world's most chaotic game of musical chairs. Ptolemy didn't just walk into Egypt with a smile and a wave. He was a man with a plan. In the chaos that followed Alexander's death, Ptolemy snuck into Egypt and declared himself the satrap, or governor, of the region. It was a bold move, the kind that either gets you killed or lands you a kingdom. Lucky for Ptolemy, it was the latter. Ptolemy's claim was initially shaky, more like a squatter's right situation than an official title. But he knew the value of good PR. He cleverly transported Alexander's body to Egypt, setting up a lavish tomb in Alexandria, a city named after the late conqueror. This was a masterstroke in ancient propaganda. Securing Alexander's body was like holding the ultimate trump card, boosting his legitimacy and making him a local hero. Now, let's talk strategy. Ptolemy didn't just rely on charm and a dead conqueror to hold onto power. He utilized Egypt's natural defenses, with deserts acting as a formidable barrier to invasions. But it wasn't all about the landscape. Ptolemy was a chess player in a world of checkers. He built a strong navy to protect Egypt's shores and maintain control over the lucrative trade routes in the Mediterranean. This guy was like a military and political IKEA, building an empire with all the pieces fitting just right. Of course, Ptolemy wasn't the only one with grand ambitions. The Diadochi spent years embroiled in wars that would make any modern soap opera look like child's play. There were alliances, betrayals, and enough drama to fill several seasons of reality TV. But Ptolemy played his cards right, allying with the right people at the right times, and keeping his head, literally, when others didn't. Ptolemy's reign marked the beginning of the Ptolemaic Dynasty, a line that ruled Egypt for almost 300 years. His descendants, including the infamous Cleopatra Roman 7, would continue to shape the course of history. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. That's a story for another time. For now, what you need to know is that Ptolemy's rise wasn't just about luck. It was a calculated mix of military prowess, political savvy, and a little bit of ancient world pizzazz. In summary, the rise of the Ptolemaic kingdom was like the perfect storm of ambition, opportunity, and geography. Ptolemy saw the potential of Egypt not just as a piece of land, but as a linchpin in the grand chess game that was the Hellenistic world. And as the dust of Alexander's empire settled, Ptolemy emerged not just as a survivor, but as a king, proving that sometimes the best way to win is not to play by the rules at all. And so, Ptolemy found himself perched securely at the helm of Egypt, a kingdom that was less a retirement plan and more a strategic jackpot. But he wasn't content to simply sit on his laurels, or on his newly acquired throne, for that matter. Turning Egypt into his personal fiefdom wasn't just about military might. It was about crafting a narrative that would resonate through history. You see, Ptolemy understood the power of myth better than most. He knew that the pen might not always be mightier than the sword, but it sure helped when the sword had done its job. First on Ptolemy's agenda was a bit of strategic divine cosplay. In a world where gods and pharaohs were practically roommates, Ptolemy wasn't about to miss out on the opportunity to dress up his rule with a touch of celestial flair. He began crafting his image as a god king, not unlike the pharaohs of old, but with a Hellenistic twist. He even claimed descent from Heracles, because why not aim high when spinning your personal mythos? This wasn't just about vanity. It was a calculated move to solidify his authority over a people who were used to their rulers being closer to the heavens than to the marketplace. Ptolemy also had his eye on Alexandria, which was fast becoming the cultural and intellectual hub of the ancient world. Think of it as the Silicon Valley of antiquity, minus the Teslas and tech giants, but with plenty of scrolls and scholars. Ptolemy was determined to make Alexandria the jewel of his empire, a place where great minds could gather, ideas could flourish, and the world could see the grandeur of his reign. The Library of Alexandria was his crown jewel, an ambitious project that aimed to collect all the knowledge of the world, or at least a respectable chunk of it. It's a shame that later on, it would become the most famous victim of a bibliophile's worst nightmare, a catastrophic fire. Now, let's pop the bubble of Ptolemaic Egypt as a cultural utopia. It wasn't exactly the egalitarian paradise that some romantic narratives would have you believe. The Ptolemaic economy was an intricate web of agriculture, trade, and taxation, with most of the wealth flowing upward to the ruling elite. The Nile might have been the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, but it was also the source of a rigid social hierarchy. The average Egyptian farmer was more likely to be toiling in the fields than attending a philosophical symposium. For most, daily life was about as far removed from the intellectual glow of Alexandria as you could get. But Ptolemy was a master of appearances, and he understood the importance of a good facade. His administration was a blend of Macedonian and native Egyptian systems, a clever way to maintain control while giving the impression of respecting local traditions. This was governance by cultural fusion, and it worked, at least for a while. The Ptolemies managed to keep a grip on Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, a testament to Ptolemy's initial groundwork in stabilizing and legitimizing his rule. However, not everything in Ptolemy's Egypt was sunshine and papyrus. The economy was heavily reliant on agriculture, and while the Nile's flooding was generally predictable, it wasn't immune to the occasional disaster. When the river failed to rise, famine could swiftly follow, reminding everyone that nature still held the ultimate trump card. Moreover, the lavish projects and constant wars drained the treasury. The Ptolemaic kings often found themselves juggling debts and taxes like a circus act, trying to keep the show going without letting the audience see the strings. Ptolemy's successors continued to walk the tightrope he had set. They inherited his knack for showmanship, but often lacked his strategic genius. The dynasty became infamous for its internal squabbles and palace intrigue, with family feuds that would make a Shakespearean drama look tame. And while Cleopatra Roman 7 is the most famous of the lot, the seeds of her eventual downfall were sown in the complex and often treacherous world that Ptolemy had helped create. In the end, Ptolemy's Egypt was a land of contrasts, a place where grandeur and grit coexisted, where the veneer of cultural brilliance could often mask underlying social and economic strains. Yet, for all its imperfections, Ptolemaic Egypt remains a fascinating chapter in the annals of history. It was a kingdom built on ambition, opportunity, and the kind of myth-making that would echo through the ages. In the grand tapestry of the ancient world, Ptolemy had woven his own legend, one that would endure long after the last of his dynasty had fallen. And so, with a blend of divine image crafting, economic reality bending, and good old-fashioned political maneuvering, Ptolemy set the stage for centuries of rule. A savvy player in the chaotic aftermath of Alexander's empire, he turned potential chaos into a personal kingdom that would endure the test of time, at least as long as history could remember it. But don't get too comfortable. There's plenty more drama on the horizon as the Ptolemies continue their dynastic dance through history. With Ptolemy, setting the stage for a dynastic marathon rather than a sprint, let's dive into the greasy gears that kept the Ptolemaic kingdom's economic engine humming. Think of Egypt under the Ptolemies as a massive ancient corporation where the CEO wears a crown, and the shareholders are a mix of Greek settlers and native Egyptians. The Nile River, as always, played the role of the company's most valuable asset, turning Egypt into the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. Now, agriculture was more than just a farmer's game. It was the backbone of the economy. Picture a world where the Nile's annual inundation wasn't just a weather report, but the difference between feast and famine. If the river cooperated, fields would burst with grain, filling the granaries to the brim. These granaries, by the way, were the Ptolemaic version of Fort Knox, stockpiling grain not just for local consumption, but for export across the ancient world. The Ptolemies were savvy enough to know that controlling grain was as good as controlling gold. With the Nile's bounty, They could feed their own population while selling surplus to starving neighbors, who'd pay a pretty drachma for the privilege. But let's not kid ourselves that this was some bucolic utopia of happy farmers and endless harvests. The Ptolemaic state had its grubby fingers in every pie, or more accurately, every loaf of bread. State control over agriculture was tighter than a pharaoh's curse. The government dictated what crops to grow, when to plant, and even how much to sell. Farmers were bound by state mandates, and woe to anyone who thought they could freelance their farming. These edicts weren't just suggestions. They were backed by the full force of Ptolemaic bureaucracy, which could make a modern DMV look like a well-oiled machine. The Greek settlers were the managerial class in this agrarian juggernaut. They received land grants, often the choicest plots, as incentives to settle and help administer the kingdom. These Greek elites had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo because, let's face it, who wouldn't want to oversee a system where the river does half the work for you? But it wasn't all sunshine and olive oil for the native Egyptians. They were the labor force, the ones drenched in Nile mud, making sure the wheels of this economic machine kept turning. Despite the Ptolemaic propaganda of a golden age, many native Egyptians might have felt like they were living in a gilded cage rather than a paradise. Taxes were as predictable as the Nile's flood, and just about as welcome. The Ptolemaic tax collectors were relentless, squeezing every last arbol from the populace to fund the luxurious lifestyles of the elite and the grandiose building projects that would make even the most ambitious pharaoh blush. The tax burden was heavy, and it wasn't just the monetary kind. Labor taxes required Egyptians to work on state projects, effectively turning them into part-time slaves for the kingdom. Trade was the other pillar of the Ptolemaic economy, and Egypt's strategic location was its ace in the hole, its ports bustling with goods like papyrus linen, and of course, grain. Egypt was the Costco of the ancient world. The Ptolemies capitalized on this, forging trade links that extended from the heart of Africa to the bustling markets of Greece and beyond. Alexandria, their crown jewel, was a melting pot of cultures and commerce, where ships from all over the Mediterranean docked, laden with goods and ideas. But trade wasn't just about goods. It was about influence. By controlling trade routes, the Ptolemies could wield power far beyond their borders, subtly shifting alliances and rivalries in their favor. It was a game of chess played on an international board, with Egypt often holding the most important pieces. Yet, for all their economic genius, the Ptolemies had to contend with the harsh realities of their times. Nature was an unpredictable partner, and when the Nile failed to flood, the kingdom faced the grim specter of famine. The granaries, those mighty symbols of abundance, could quickly become empty vaults. The state's heavy-handed economic control could alleviate some issues, but not all. When the river's bounty was less generous, tensions rose, and the cracks in this economic edifice began to show. The Ptolemaic economy was a high-wire act, balancing prosperity and precariousness. While the Greek settlers and rulers lived in relative opulence, the native Egyptians toiled under the weight of taxes and labor demands. The gap between the haves and the have-nots was as wide as the Nile itself, and it was only a matter of time before the scales would tip. So, as the Ptolemaic dynasty continued to weave its complex tapestry of power, wealth, and myth, the everyday Egyptians were left to navigate their own realities. For them, the Golden Age was less about golden opportunities and more about surviving the demands of a kingdom built on their backs. Yet, the allure of Ptolemaic Egypt endures, a testament to the power of myth-making and the enduring appeal of a civilization that dared to dream as grandly as the pharaohs of old. As we continue our journey through the Ptolemaic kingdom, remember that behind every monumental achievement, there lies a story of human endeavor and endurance. The Ptolemies might have authored their own legend, but it was the people of Egypt who lived it, day by day, flood by flood. With the stage set and the economic machine in motion, the Ptolemaic saga is far from over. There's intrigue aplenty as the dynasty navigates the choppy waters of history, steering towards a future as uncertain as the Nile's flood. So, hold on to your laurels, because the story of Egypt's Hellenistic heyday is just getting started. Now, let's dive headfirst into the Ptolemaic family dynamics. Think less, leave it to Beaver, and more Game of Thrones, with a side of keeping up with the Kardashians. The Ptolemaic dynasty was essentially one big, dysfunctional reality show, complete with sibling rivalries, backstabbing, and power plays that would give Machiavelli a run for his money. Nowhere was this more evident than in the internal squabbles that plagued the ruling family, turning the royal court into an ancient episode of Survivor, but with less coconut and more poison. As with any good drama, it all started at the top. Ptolemy had set the bar high with his savvy maneuvering and larger-than-life persona, but his successors, not so much. The Ptolemaic rulers had a penchant for marrying within the family to keep the bloodline pure, or as pure as you can get when your family tree looks more like a wreath. This led to a delightful cocktail of jealousy, betrayal, and the occasional murder, as siblings jostled for position in the cutthroat world of Egyptian politics. The throne was a revolving door for Ptolemies who were either too ambitious or too naive, often both. Take Ptolemy Roman VIII, affectionately nicknamed Fiskin, which translates to potbelly. Not exactly a title that screams respect, but there you have it. His reign was marked by brutality and a knack for alienating just about everyone. He once expelled the intellectuals from Alexandria, which is about as smart as kicking out all the engineers from Silicon Valley. Suffice it to say, his rule was a chaotic mess, complete with public unrest and family feuds that would make Thanksgiving dinner at the Lannisters look tame. But the Ptolemaic rulers weren't just their own worst enemies. They also had to contend with external pressures that threatened to blow their carefully constructed house of cards to the ground. Enter the Romans, those pesky neighbors who were like the HOA of the ancient world, always sticking their noses into everyone else's business. Rome had grown from a scrappy city-state into a Mediterranean superpower with an appetite for expansion that would make even the most ambitious Ptolemy blush. Rome's interest in Egypt wasn't just about land. It was about securing a steady supply of grain. Picture this, a metropolis of 1 million people, all hungry for their daily bread. Egypt's fertile lands were the ancient world's version of a supermarket, and Rome wanted to make sure its shelves were always stocked. The Ptolemies, ever the savvy negotiators, tried to keep Rome at arm's length with a mix of diplomacy, bribes, and strategic marriages. But as the saying goes, you can't have your cake and eat it too, which in this case was more like you can't have your grain and keep it either. Amidst this political turbulence, the Ptolemaic rulers attempted to navigate a landscape littered with potential pitfalls. They forged alliances when it suited them and switched sides when the winds of fortune shifted. This was a delicate dance, with each step needing to be carefully calculated to avoid the ever-watchful eyes of Rome. But as the Roman Republic turned into the Roman Empire, the Ptolemies found themselves increasingly backed into a corner, their autonomy slipping away like grains of sand through an hourglass. Enter Cleopatra, Roman VII, the drama queen of the ancient world and the last of the Ptolemaic line to hold the reins of power. Cleopatra was nothing if not a master of reinvention, a chameleon who could adapt to any situation. Her ambition was matched only by her charisma, and she wasn't about to let Egypt become just another Roman province without a fight. She had a flair for theatrics and a penchant for alliances with powerful men, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, to name a few, but her ultimate goal was to preserve Egypt's independence. Cleopatra's reign was a whirlwind of political intrigue and personal gambles. She used her legendary charm to forge alliances that would ensure Egypt's survival, even if it meant cozying up to Rome. Her relationship with Julius Caesar was both a personal and political strategy, a move that secured her position and produced a son, Caesarion, who she hoped would someday rule both Egypt and Rome. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. After Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra pinned her hopes on Mark Antony, one of Rome's most powerful generals. Their partnership was part romance, part political alliance, and 100% a thorn in the side of Octavian, Caesar's heir and future Emperor Augustus. Antony and Cleopatra's union was a bold defiance of Roman authority, and their eventual downfall was as dramatic as any Shakespearean tragedy. The Battle of Actium in 31 BC was the nail in the coffin for Cleopatra and Antony. Octavian's forces crushed their combined armies, and the couple's dream of a mighty empire crumbled. Cleopatra, ever the strategist, attempted to negotiate with Octavian, but when it became clear that her fate was sealed, she chose to end her life on her own terms, reportedly with the bite of an asp. It was a dramatic exit worthy of her storied life, leaving behind a legacy that would echo through history. With Cleopatra's death in 30 BC, Egypt fell into Roman hands, marking the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty and the beginning of a new chapter in its history. The once mighty kingdom became just another province in the vast Roman Empire, its treasures and grain now serving its conquerors. Cleopatra's efforts to keep Egypt independent had ultimately failed, but her legend was only beginning. The story of the Ptolemaic dynasty is a testament to the complexity of human ambition and the relentless march of history. It's a saga filled with highs and lows, triumphs and tragedies, all set against the backdrop of one of the most fascinating periods in the ancient world. While the Ptolemies may have ultimately lost their kingdom, their legacy endures, a reminder of the power of myth, the allure of power, and the enduring mystery of Cleopatra's smile. As we wrap up this chapter, remember that history is rarely as clean-cut as the textbooks would have you believe. Behind every grand narrative lies a tangled web of human stories, each one contributing to the rich tapestry of the past. And as we prepare to delve into the final act of the Ptolemaic tale, keep in mind that the end is often just the beginning of another story waiting to be told. So stay tuned, because the history of Egypt's Hellenistic heyday still has a few surprises left in store. So here we are, standing at the crossroads of history, where the sands of time shift beneath the weight of Cleopatra's demise and the dawn of Roman rule in Egypt. The year is 30 BC, and with Cleopatra gone, Egypt's fate is sealed tighter than a Roman scroll. Octavian, soon to be Augustus, is at the helm, and he's not exactly the kind of guy to leave loose ends. Egypt, once a glittering kingdom of the Ptolemies, becomes his personal prize, a province that feeds the ever-hungry beast that is Rome. Incorporating Egypt into the Roman Empire wasn't just a matter of planting a flag and calling it a day. This was about logistics, strategy, and a touch of imperial flair. The Romans were nothing if not efficient, and they knew that Egypt's most valuable asset, the Nile, could fuel their empire's insatiable appetite. With an annual production of grain that could feed millions, Egypt was like the ancient world's breadbasket on steroids. Octavian understood that controlling this wealth of resources was akin to holding the keys to the empire's pantry. But let's not romanticize this transition as some seamless handover. The reality was far more gritty. The Romans didn't just waltz in and take over. They implemented a system that ensured Egypt would never again rise as a power in its own right. The Ptolemaic administration was dismantled, and in its place, a Roman governor took charge, backed by the might of Roman legions. This wasn't just about governance. It was about ensuring loyalty, and nothing says, stay in line, quite like a legion stationed at your door. Economically, the Romans played it smart. They didn't interfere too much with Egypt's agricultural system, recognizing that the Ptolemies had already done the heavy lifting by organizing the land into a well-oiled machine. Taxes, however, were another story. If you thought Ptolemaic tax collectors were tough, the Romans took it to a whole new level. They squeezed every last drop out of the land, ensuring that Rome got its cut of Egypt's abundant resources. The wealth of Egypt flowed into Roman coffers, funding everything from gladiatorial games to the sprawling infrastructure of the empire. Culturally, the integration of Egypt into the Roman world was a double-edged sword. On one hand, Egypt's rich tapestry of history and tradition offered Rome a treasure trove of knowledge, art, and religion. The Romans, ever the magpies of the ancient world, adopted and adapted what they found useful. Egyptian gods found their way into Roman pantheons, and the allure of Egyptian mysticism captivated Roman imaginations. On the other hand, the distinct identity of Egypt was subsumed under the pervasive influence of Roman culture. The great city of Alexandria, once a beacon of Hellenistic scholarship, became just another jewel in the Roman crown. But let's pause here to consider the legacy of the Ptolemaic era. For nearly 300 years, the Ptolemies had ruled with a blend of Greek sophistication and Egyptian tradition, crafting a hybrid culture that was as unique as it was influential. The romantic image of Cleopatra, the last of the line, continues to captivate us, a testament to the enduring power of myth. Yet behind this glamour lies a harsh truth. The Ptolemaic dynasty was rife with internal strife, economic challenges, and political machinations that ultimately led to its downfall. The Ptolemies may have built a kingdom on ambition and opportunity, but their legacy is a complex one. They left behind a land that was strategically vital yet politically fragile, a testament to the duality of their rule. While they ushered in an era of cultural and intellectual achievement, they also sowed the seeds of their own destruction through dynastic infighting and unsustainable economic practices. The romanticized vision of a golden age is tempered by the reality of a dynasty that struggled to maintain its grasp on power. In the grand scheme of history, Egypt's incorporation into the Roman Empire marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The Ptolemaic era set the stage for Egypt's role as a crucial province within the Roman world, a role that would shape its destiny for centuries to come. As Egypt became an integral part of the empire, it continued to influence Roman culture, contributing to the rich tapestry of a civilization that spanned continents. So, what can we take away from this whirlwind journey through the rise and fall of the Ptolemaic kingdom? Perhaps it's a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a complex interplay of human ambition, cultural exchange, and the relentless march of time. The Ptolemies, with all their flaws and achievements, offer us a glimpse into the enduring power of legacy, the stories we tell and the myths we create, echoing through the ages. As we close the book on this chapter of history, let's remember that the past is never truly gone. It shapes the present and informs the future in ways we often can't predict. The Ptolemaic era, with its blend of romance and reality, continues to inspire and intrigue, a testament to the enduring allure of a civilization that dared to dream as grandly as the pharaohs of old. And as we turn the page, we carry with us the lessons and legacies of those who walked before us, their stories etched into the sands of time. Armenia, perched like a rebellious teenager between towering empires, didn't just pop up on the historical radar with a polite knock. No, it basically kicked down the door and demanded to be noticed. This kingdom was nestled right at the crossroads of the ancient world, a geographic position that was both a blessing and a curse. With the Roman Empire to one side and the mighty Persians to the other, Armenia was like the juicy steak stuck between two ravenous lions. I mean, who wouldn't want a piece of that action? Let's talk terrain. Armenia is no pancake-flat plain. Its landscape is a rugged jigsaw of mountains, valleys, and highlands, a natural fortress that both protected and isolated. The Armenians made the most of this alpine playground, cultivating a vibrant culture that was as diverse as the topography itself. The mountainous terrain was like Mother Nature's way of saying, here, have some privacy, but also good luck getting anywhere in a hurry. It's no wonder the Armenians developed a reputation for being fiercely independent. When you're surrounded by cliffs and peaks, why wouldn't you feel a bit invincible? But don't be fooled into thinking it was all idyllic seclusion. Armenia's strategic location meant it was a cultural melting pot long before that was a trendy phrase. It was a place where East met West, where Greek, Persian, and later Roman influences mingled, clashed, and occasionally threw wild parties. This cultural mosaic was both a strength and a liability. On one hand, it made Armenia a hub of trade and ideas. On the other, it made it a prime target for those looking to expand their empires. If Armenia were a person, it'd be the one at the party that everyone wants to talk to, even if just to figure out what makes them tick. Now, before we get too misty-eyed about Armenia's golden age, let's sprinkle in some hard truths. The kingdom's early dynastic power plays were not the stuff of fairy tales. They were more like a Game of Thrones episode, minus the dragons, but with plenty of backstabbing and intrigue. The Artaxiad dynasty, which rose to prominence in the 2nd century BCE, was particularly adept at this high-stakes game. These rulers weren't just sitting around admiring the view. They were strategizing, negotiating, and quite frankly, doing whatever it took to maintain power. The Artaxiads understood that Armenia's strength lay in its ability to play the big boys off against each other. They were the original masters of the diplomatic dance, aligning with Rome one minute and Persia the next, all while trying to keep their own house in order. It was a delicate balancing act, like juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. One wrong move, and it was all over. Speaking of tightropes, let's not forget the economic realities. Armenia's economy was as rugged as its landscape, heavily reliant on agriculture and trade. The kingdom was rich in resources like copper, gold, and those luscious valleys perfect for growing everything from grapes to grain. But wealth, as always, came with strings attached. Those fertile lands were a magnet for invaders, and the constant threat of conflict meant that Armenians were always on their toes, ready to defend what was theirs. And defend they did, often with considerable success. The Armenians had a knack for turning their mountainous terrain into a formidable defense mechanism. Think of it as the ancient version of home field advantage, only with more swords and fewer referees. This natural defense allowed Armenia to resist assimilation by larger empires for centuries, carving out a unique identity that was as resilient as it was rich. Yet, for all its strength, Armenia's position was precarious. It was a kingdom caught between the rock of ambition and the hard place of reality. The constant pressure from neighboring powers meant that stability was often more of an aspiration than a reality. The Armenians had to navigate not just the physical peaks and valleys of their land, but the political ones as well. In the end, the early history of the Kingdom of Armenia is a testament to resilience and adaptation. It's a story of a people who not only survived, but thrived in a world that was as volatile as it was vibrant. And while the kingdom's fortunes would rise and fall with the tides of empire, one thing remained constant: Armenia's indomitable spirit. That, my friends, is a legacy that no mountain or empire could ever conquer. And speaking of indomitable spirits, let's talk about the man who practically put Armenia on the ancient map in bold letters. King Tigranes the Great. Picture a ruler with the ambition of Napoleon, the political savvy of Machiavelli, and the audacity of a reality TV star. Tigranes wasn't just some guy with a fancy crown. He was the powerhouse who took Armenia from being a footnote in history to a headliner. Under his reign, around 95 to 55 BCE, Armenia did more than just survive between empires. It thrived and expanded like it was on ancient steroids. Now, Tigranes wasn't content with just being a regional player. No, he wanted an empire that could rival Rome itself. And for a brief, shining moment, he almost pulled it off. At the height of his power, Tigranes controlled a territory that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Caspian Sea, encompassing parts of modern-day Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, and Iran. We're talking about an empire roughly 3 million square kilometers in size. Not bad for a kingdom that started as the geopolitical equivalent of a third wheel. But let's not get too carried away with the grandeur. Tigranes' empire building was as much about strategic marriages and alliances as it was about military might. He aligned himself with Mithridates VI of Pontus, his father-in-law, a move that was less about family dinners and more about consolidating power. Together, they formed a formidable alliance that even the Romans found, well, inconvenient. However, the real drama unfolded when Tigranes' ambitions inevitably rubbed Rome the wrong way. You see, Rome had a bit of a control issue. They liked to think of the Mediterranean as their personal swimming pool. So, when Tigranes started throwing his weight around in Syria and threatening Roman interests, the stage was set for a classic imperial showdown. Enter the Roman general Lucullus, who in 69 BCE decided he'd had enough of Tigranes' antics. The result, the Battle of Tigranossera, where Lucullus gave Tigranes a reality check in the form of a Roman legion. But before we start writing Tigranes off as just another overambitious ruler, let's give credit where it's due. His reign was characterized by an economic boom that turned Armenia into a bustling hub of trade and culture. The capital, Tigranossera, was a marvel of urban planning. Think of it as the Dubai of its time, minus the skyscrapers. The city was a melting pot of cultures, with a diverse populace that included Greeks, Jews, and Syrians, all contributing to a vibrant marketplace of ideas and goods. Tigranes knew that wealth wasn't just about hoarding gold. It was about creating a thriving economy. However, economic booms have a nasty habit of being followed by busts, and Armenia was no exception. Tigranes' expansionist policies came with a hefty price tag. The costs of maintaining a sprawling empire, complete with a standing army and flashy infrastructure projects, drained the kingdom's coffers faster than you can say unsustainable growth. By the time Rome came knocking, Armenia was already feeling the financial strain. The clash with Rome wasn't just a military defeat, it was an economic disaster. The once flourishing trade routes were disrupted, and the empire's resources were stretched thinner than a Roman toga. Tigranes' ambitious building projects, which once symbolized Armenia's prosperity, now stood as reminders of overreach. It's the classic tale of biting off more than you can chew, only with more swords and fewer happy endings. Yet, Despite the setbacks, Tigranes managed to hold onto power for a few more years, proving that resilience was practically in the Armenian DNA. His later years saw him trying to mend fences with Rome, a diplomatic pivot that was as much about survival as it was about strategy. In 66 BCE, Tigranes eventually submitted to Pompey, Rome's new rising star, agreeing to become a Roman client king. It was a pragmatic move. Better to be a big fish in a smaller pond than a dead one in the ocean. As Tigranes' reign drew to a close, Armenia's golden age began to tarnish. The kingdom was reduced to a shadow of its former glory, its territories carved up, and its power diminished. The economic bust that followed the boom left Armenia struggling to maintain its infrastructure and pay off debts. It's a tale as old as time. Rapid expansion followed by inevitable contraction, a cycle that even the greatest of empires couldn't escape. But in the grand tapestry of history, Tigranes left an indelible mark. His legacy was one of audacious ambition and relentless resilience. He transformed Armenia into a beacon of culture and power, even if only for a fleeting moment. And while his empire ultimately crumbled, the spirit of innovation and tenacity he inspired lived on. Armenia might have fallen from its zenith, but it never disappeared, much like an ancient legend that refuses to fade away. So, as we leave Tigranes the Great surveying his once mighty kingdom, remember this. History is nothing if not a series of grand gambles, with empires rising and falling on the whims of ambition and the fortunes of fate. And in this Game of Thrones, Tigranes played his hand with boldness, if not always with success. But the story of Armenia is far from over. There are still twists and turns to come as the kingdom navigates the choppy waters of the ancient world. Stay tuned, because the next chapter is just getting started. As Tigranes the Great faded from the spotlight, Armenia braced itself for a new kind of balancing act. And trust me, this wasn't some Cirque du Soleil performance. With Rome and the Parthian Empire both eyeing Armenia like it was the last slice of pizza at a party, the kingdom found itself in a geopolitical tug-of-war that would make the Cold War look like a friendly game of chess. We're talking about Armenia becoming the ultimate pawn in the ancient world's high-stakes game of risk. First, let's set the scene. The Parthian Empire, with its impressive cavalry and penchant for Silk Road shopping, was not about to let Rome have all the fun. These guys were the new power in Persia, having booted out the Seleucids and established themselves as a force to be reckoned with. And then there was Rome, the empire with a serious case of expansionitis, who had been chipping away at the Mediterranean like it was their personal jigsaw puzzle. With both empires casting longing glances at Armenia, the kingdom found itself caught in a classic case of who do I annoy less? Diplomatically, Armenia had to perform gymnastics that would put Olympic athletes to shame. The Armenian kings of this era were like those savvy diplomats you see in movies, always trying to keep one foot in both camps. They had to carefully navigate alliances that shifted as often as the wind, ensuring that neither Rome nor Parthia felt too scorned. This meant a lot of strategic marriages, treaties written in the fine print, and the ever-present risk of getting caught in a crossfire. It was less about who you knew and more about who you could appease. Economically, this power struggle was a mixed bag for Armenia. On one hand, being buddy-buddy with two major empires meant access to lucrative trade routes and the chance to import all the latest fashions. On the other, the constant threat of invasion wasn't exactly great for business. Armenia's economy, heavily reliant on agriculture and trade, was like a ship navigating a storm, always trying to stay afloat while dodging the waves. The kingdom had to maintain its infrastructure, keep the trade flowing, and somehow pay for the armies standing ready at the borders. It was a costly game, and the stakes were high. But let's not forget the wild card in this game: religion. Enter Christianity, stage right, ready to shake things up more than a rock concert in a library. In 301 AD, Armenia made a move that would forever alter its identity. It became the first nation to adopt Christianity as its state religion. Yep, you heard that right. Before Rome, before Byzantium, Armenia took the plunge and declared itself officially Christian. And this wasn't just a case of spiritual enlightenment. It was a strategic masterstroke. Adopting Christianity was like Armenia saying, "Hey, Rome, we're on your team." It was a clever way to align more closely with the Roman Empire, which was increasingly sympathetic to Christians, while setting itself apart from the Zoroastrian Parthians. King Tiridates Roman III didn't just wake up one morning and decide he was bored with the old guards. No, this was a calculated move to forge a new identity and secure Armenia's place in the Roman sphere of influence. It was the ancient version of playing both sides, but with a holy twist. Yet this wasn't just about politics. It was a cultural revolution. The adoption of Christianity marked a profound shift in Armenian society. Out went the old pagan temples, and in came the new churches, complete with their own unique architecture. Armenian Christianity developed its own distinctive style, with a liturgy and traditions that set it apart from its Roman and Byzantine counterparts. It was a bold declaration of independence, even as it tied Armenia closer to the Roman world. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with the change. The transition wasn't entirely smooth. There were plenty of pagans who weren't ready to trade in their old deities for a new monotheistic faith. But the Armenian Apostolic Church, as it came to be known, gradually took root and became a cornerstone of Armenian identity. It was a unifying force, providing a sense of continuity in a world that seemed perpetually on the brink of chaos. So, as Armenia danced its precarious dance between Rome and Parthia, the kingdom was also undergoing a transformation from within. The adoption of Christianity wasn't just a footnote in history. It was a seismic shift that would reverberate for centuries. It provided Armenia with a new sense of purpose and a cultural legacy that would endure long after the Roman and Parthian empires had crumbled into dust. In this turbulent era, Armenia proved it could do more than just survive. It could innovate, adapt, and redefine itself in the face of overwhelming odds. The kingdom wasn't just a pawn in the game. It was a player with its own moves, its own strategies, and its own story to tell. And while the geopolitical chess game was far from over, Armenia had shown that it was more than just a piece on the board. It was a kingdom with a spirit that refused to be conquered. Stay tuned, because the saga of Armenia is far from finished. The next chapters will see new challenges, new alliances, and new opportunities for this resilient kingdom to leave its mark on history. From the clash of empires to the rise of a new faith, Armenia's journey is a testament to the enduring power of identity, innovation, and the indomitable will to survive. Keep your eyes peeled, because this story is just getting started. Now, as we leave the stage set with Armenia's strategic adoption of Christianity, let's dive headlong into the ensuing chapters of chaos and cunning that defined its decline. If you thought the geopolitical dance between Rome and Parthia was complex, wait until you get a load of the Byzantine and Sassanid Empire's power struggle over Armenia. Trust me, this was less a tug-of-war and more a full-blown wrestling match, with Armenia caught squarely in the middle like an ancient referee who kept getting body-slammed. First, let's take a look at the Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of Rome that had a serious superiority complex, believing itself the rightful heir to the Roman legacy. These guys were like the overachieving siblings who couldn't stand seeing anyone else play with their toys. They wanted Armenia for its strategic position and were more than willing to flex their muscles to get it. On the other side of the ring, we have the Sassanid Empire, the new Persian powerhouse that had replaced the Parthians and had its eyes set on expanding their influence westward. These empires were like two heavyweight boxers, each with their own fan club, and poor Armenia was the unfortunate ring they fought in. Now, Armenia wasn't just a hapless victim in this high-stakes contest. The kingdom still had some tricks up its sleeve, like a seasoned poker player trying to bluff with a pair of twos. The Armenian nobility, or Nakaras, were key players in this drama. Picture them as a group of power brokers who were as likely to stab each other in the back as they were to stand united against external threats. The Nakaras had their own feuds and rivalries, and their allegiance could change faster than you can say political convenience. This internal strife made Armenia a less than stable ally, and it didn't exactly help their negotiating position. Economically, the constant warfare was like an endless drought on Armenia's resources. It's hard to maintain a thriving economy when your fields are trampled by foreign armies, and your trade routes are as secure as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. The endless conflicts took a toll on the kingdom's agriculture, which was the backbone of its economy. Grain fields were burned, vineyards were destroyed, and livestock were either stolen or slaughtered. The once bustling trade hubs of Armenia felt the strain, as merchants found their caravans plundered and their profits dwindling. And speaking of dwindling, let's talk about the population. The constant battles, coupled with occasional sieges and raids, meant that the population of Armenia was decreasing faster than a snowball in a volcano. People fled to the mountains or to neighboring regions to escape the chaos, leaving behind ghost towns and deserted villages. The socio-economic impact was devastating, as fewer people meant fewer hands to work the fields, fewer soldiers to defend the kingdom, and fewer taxpayers to fill the royal coffers. It was a vicious cycle that fed into itself, each problem exacerbating the next. But in the midst of all this turmoil, there was still an undeniable resilience in the Armenian spirit. The adoption of Christianity provided a unifying identity that transcended the political chaos. The Armenian Apostolic Church became not just a religious institution, but a cultural bastion, preserving the language, literature, and traditions of Armenia even as the world around it seemed to collapse. This was a time when faith wasn't just a personal belief. It was a lifeline, a banner under which the Armenians could rally. However, even the most resilient spirit can be tested to its breaking point. The Byzantine-Sassanid conflicts reached a fever pitch in the 6th and 7th centuries, with wars that were as destructive as they were inconclusive. The Armenians, caught in the crossfire, were like the perpetual bystanders in a bar fight that never ended. The Treaty of Envarsak in 484 AD attempted to partition Armenia between the Byzantines and the Sassanids, but it was less a peace agreement and more a temporary band-aid on a gaping wound. Neither side was willing to relinquish their claim, and the Armenians found themselves divided, with allegiances split down geographical and familial lines. Yet, despite the odds, Armenia's cultural legacy continued to flourish. The Armenian script, developed by Mesrop Mashtarts in the early 5th century, became a powerful tool for preserving the Armenian identity. This wasn't just about writing letters home. This was about creating a distinct cultural and religious literature that would endure long after the empires that fought over Armenia had faded. It was a declaration of cultural independence in an era where political independence was a distant dream. As the Byzantine and Sassanid empires continued their relentless struggle, the Armenians had to contend with another rising threat, the Arab Caliphate. By the mid-7th century, the Arabs burst onto the scene like an unexpected plot twist, sweeping through the region with a fervor that left the old powers reeling. The Battle of Nineveh in 627 AD marked a turning point, with the Byzantines finally defeating the Sassanids, only for both to be blindsided by the rapid expansion of the Islamic Caliphate. It was the ancient equivalent of winning a marathon only to be run over by a speeding chariot. For Armenia, this new player in the geopolitical game was both a challenge and an opportunity. The Arab Caliphate, unlike its predecessors, was less interested in micromanaging Armenia and more focused on extracting tribute and converting the population. The Nakaras, ever the pragmatists, found ways to negotiate with the new rulers, sometimes gaining more autonomy than they ever had under Byzantine or Sassanid control. It was a new chapter in the ongoing saga of Armenia's survival, a story of adaptability in the face of overwhelming odds. So, as we leave Armenia standing at yet another crossroads of history, remember this. The kingdom's decline wasn't a simple story of conquest and collapse. It was a complex tapestry of internal divisions, external pressures, and cultural resilience. Armenia's story is a testament to the enduring power of identity, even in the face of relentless challenges. And while this chapter of decline may seem bleak, it's also a prelude to the next chapter of renewal. Stay tuned, because Armenia's story is far from over. So, as we leave Armenia standing at yet another crossroads of history, let's plunge into the final act of this historical drama. Picture Armenia in the 9th century, a kingdom that's been battered, bruised, and bandied about by empires like a medieval soccer ball. Yet somehow, it's still hanging in there. But the tale we're about to unravel isn't your typical rise and fall epic. It's a saga of fragmentation, resilience, a cultural phoenix rising from the ashes. First, let's talk fragmentation. By the late 9th century, the once unified kingdom of Armenia was as divided as a Thanksgiving dinner after political debates. The Bagratuni dynasty, rising like a phoenix in 885 AD, managed to establish a semblance of order. but the reality was a patchwork of semi-independent principalities. Imagine a jigsaw puzzle where every piece thinks it's the most important. Armenia was technically a kingdom, but in practice, it was a mosaic of territories, each ruled by its own Nakara, each with their own agendas. The Bagratid kingdom, named after its ruling dynasty, was like a family reunion where everyone was wearing different team jerseys. While they were nominally united under one king, in reality, it was more like a loose confederation of feuding cousins. Economically, this fragmentation was both a curse and a blessing. On the one hand, it meant that resources were scattered, and the economy lacked a centralized powerhouse. On the other, it encouraged local innovation and trade, as each region hustled to make its mark. Armenia became a hotbed of commerce and culture, with bustling markets and emerging trade routes connecting it to Byzantium, Persia, and beyond. But let's not sugarcoat the situation. This period was fraught with challenges. The Arab Caliphate, seeing Armenia as a ripe fruit just hanging on the tree, imposed heavy tributes that drained resources faster than you can say overdue taxes. Yet, the Armenians, ever the masters of adaptation, found ways to maneuver through this geopolitical quagmire. They played the long game, leveraging their strategic position to negotiate alliances and stave off direct conquest. It was a high-wire act, with no safety net in sight. And while we're on the subject of high stakes, let's take a moment to bust a few myths. There's a romantic notion that Armenia's fragmentation was purely a tale of noble resistance against foreign domination. The reality, however, was more complicated. Sure, there were moments of heroism and unity, but there were also plenty of backroom deals, betrayals, and power grabs. The Nakaras weren't just gallant defenders of the homeland. They were pragmatic politicians, often driven by self-interest. It's a stark reminder that history, much like a soap opera, is rarely black and white. As we zoom in on the cultural legacy of this era, one can't ignore the artistic and architectural boom that Armenia experienced. The construction of monasteries and churches became a national pastime, with structures like the Cathedral of Ani, completed in 1001 AD, standing as testament to Armenian ingenuity. These weren't just religious buildings, they were cultural fortresses, preserving Armenian identity in stone and scripture. The artistry of the time wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a defiant proclamation of identity in a world that seemed hell-bent on erasing it. Yet, no story of Armenia would be complete without acknowledging the looming shadow of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines, ever the opportunists, saw Armenia's internal divisions as an invitation. By 1045, they managed to annex the Bagratid kingdom, though not without a fight. It was a bittersweet moment. Armenia was absorbed into a larger empire, yet its cultural and religious identity remained unbowed. The Armenians were like stubborn oaks amidst a forest fire, scorched but not consumed. Fast forward a few decades to 1071, and we find the Seljuk Turks crashing onto the scene like an uninvited guest at a wedding. Their victory over the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert sent shockwaves through the region. For Armenia, it was the beginning of yet another chapter of conquest and adaptation. The Seljuks were more interested in control than cultural assimilation, which allowed Armenian traditions to persist even under new rulers. It's a testament to the resilience of Armenian culture that, despite being buffeted by waves of conquest, it continued to thrive and evolve. Now, as we sift through the myths and realities of Armenia's history, it's crucial to recognize the enduring impact of this ancient kingdom. In modern geopolitical narratives, Armenia often finds itself at the crossroads once more, a testament to its strategic geography and indomitable spirit. The echoes of its past resonate today, reminding us that while empires rise and fall, cultural identity can be a far more enduring legacy. The romanticized tales of Armenia as a bastion of resistance are appealing, but they miss the nuanced reality of a kingdom that survived through shrewd diplomacy, cultural innovation, and an unyielding sense of identity. Armenia's history isn't just a saga of loss and survival. It's a story of transformation and resilience. From the ashes of fragmentation, it forged a cultural legacy that continues to inspire, proving that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in unity, but in diversity. So, as we put a bow on this historical journey, remember that Armenia's story is far from a simple narrative of rise and fall. It's a complex tapestry of ambition, survival, and cultural perseverance. And while the kingdom of old may have fragmented, its legacy endures, a reminder that history is not just about the empires we build, but the identities we forge and preserve against all odds. As we close the book on this chapter, keep your eyes on Armenia, because its story is still unfolding, shaped by its past, yet ever looking toward the future. If you ever wondered what happens when a Jamaican spirit meets Scottish stubbornness, look no further than the life of Mary Seacole, a trailblazer who was mixing more than just herbal remedies long before your local hipster apothecary. Born in 1805 in the bustling town of Kingston, Jamaica, Mary came into the world with a multicultural bang. Her father was a Scottish soldier, a man likely more familiar with the bagpipes than the Caribbean sun, while her mother was a free Jamaican woman who ran a boarding house. Talk about a fusion menu of heritage. From the get-go, Mary was immersed in a world where the clatter of military boots met the vibrant rhythms of Jamaican life. Her mother, known affectionately as the Doctress, was a healer in her own right, practicing her craft at the family's boarding house, which doubled as a one-stop shop for the weary and unwell. It was here, amid the fragrant herbs and the non-stop chatter of guests, that Mary cut her teeth in the art of healing. She learned to wield both African and European medical practices like a maestro with a baton, stitching together a medical repertoire that would make any modern-day general practitioner envious. Now, you might think that a girl with such a background would be sitting pretty and sipping on a rum punch. But Mary had other plans that didn't involve lounging around. Was a born adventurer with a fierce desire to see the world and heal its ailments. Her early years were filled with the kind of informal education that only a mixed-race woman in the 19th century Caribbean could receive. She was no stranger to the harsh realities of colonial life, where racial and economic hierarchies were as rigid as a British upper lip. Mary's first foray into the wider world came with a trip to London in the 1820s. It was a place of rain, fog, and more tea than you can shake a stick at. Here, Mary experienced the delightful British pastime of ignoring anyone who didn't fit the mold of a proper Victorian citizen. But she wasn't one to let a little cultural frostiness get in the way. Instead, she returned to Jamaica with a head full of ideas and a determination as ironclad as any Royal Navy ship. By the time she reached Panama in the 1850, Mary was a seasoned traveler and a formidable nurse. The journey to Panama wasn't exactly a Caribbean cruise. It was a rough trek through the jungle, dodging everything from mosquitoes the size of small birds to the infamous Panama fever. But Mary was undeterred. She set up shop in Cruces, a town that was as much a melting pot as her own background. With the California gold rush in full swing, Panama became a key crossing point for prospectors willing to risk life and limb for a shot at fortune. And where there were people, there was illness. Cholera, that insidious killer of the 19th century, was running rampant. The disease didn't discriminate. It claimed rich and poor alike, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. Mary stepped up to the plate, armed with her mother's wisdom and her own unyielding resolve. She wasn't just treating the symptoms. She was attacking the problem with a vigor that would put many modern health officials to shame. Her methods were as diverse as her background. She combined traditional treatments like mustard plasters and herbal infusions with the latest European medical practices. If there was a cure to be found, Mary was determined to find it, and her patients praised her efforts. Her success in Panama didn't just bolster her reputation, it cemented her status as a force to be reckoned within the world of medicine. Mary's story is a testament to the power of cultural blending and self-education. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a pioneer who navigated the complex landscapes of race, gender, and empire with a deftness that would make any modern diplomat proud. Her early life was more than a prelude. It was the foundation upon which she built a legacy that would inspire generations to come. So, next time you're sipping your kombucha or popping a vitamin, spare a thought for Mary Seacole. She was brewing up health solutions long before it was cool. In the mid-1850, Mary Seacole found herself at another crossroads, this time with the Crimean War looming like a particularly grim thundercloud over Europe. The war was a messy tangle of empires, egos, and an astonishing amount of bad decision-making. a bit like a historical reality show, but with far higher stakes. And where there's chaos, you can bet there's a need for someone with Mary's unyielding spirit and medical prowess. Mary, always one to rise to a challenge, decided it was high time to extend her healing hands to the battlefields of Crimea. She rolled up her sleeves, crafted a plan to volunteer as a nurse, and approached the British War Office. Now, you'd think that with a war raging and soldiers dropping like flies, British would welcome any help they could get. But oh no, Mary was met with the kind of frosty reception usually reserved for overly enthusiastic door-to-door salespeople. The War Office rejected her application, not once, not twice, but multiple times. Their reasons? Well, they never quite made those clear, but one can speculate that Mary's gender, race, and her non-traditional background were wrapped up in a not-so-neat package of Victorian prejudice. Undeterred, Mary shrugged off the bureaucratic snub with the kind of resilience that makes for inspirational wall posters. She decided if the War Office wasn't going to open a door for her, she'd simply build her own. And that's exactly what she did, literally and figuratively. Financing her own way, Mary set sail for Crimea in 1855, armed with a stash of medical supplies, a determination that could rival any general, and a plan to establish what would become the British Hotel. The British Hotel was less of a hotel and more of a cross between a clinic and a comfort station. Strategically set up near Balaclava, it became a beacon of warmth and care amidst the cold despair of war. Soldiers trudged in for a heart meal, a kind word, or medical attention, more valuable than gold in the bleak landscape of war. Mary provided them with hearty stews, fresh bread, and remedies for their ailments alongside her famous hospitality. Imagine being a weary soldier, stumbling in from the battlefield to be greeted by Mary's indomitable presence. It's no wonder she was often referred to as Mother Seacole. Now, while Mary was busy building a home away from home for soldiers, another woman was making waves in the Crimean War narrative, Florence Nightingale. Ah, yes, the lady with the lamp. Nightingale's contributions have been lauded by history books to the point where they almost need their own monument. But here's the kicker. While Florence was doing commendable work with sanitation in a more official capacity, Mary was down in the trenches, quite literally in the mud, offering hands-on care and comfort often overlooked in the grand narratives of war. Mary's contributions, while overshadowed by the Nightingale legend, were no less significant. She was a pioneer of holistic care long before it became a buzzword, treating the soldiers not just as patients, but as people. Her ability to blend medical expertise with genuine humanity was a testament to her unique approach to nursing and care. Unlike Nightingale, who had the backing of the British establishment, Mary had to rely on her wits, charm, and entrepreneurial spirit to make her mark. And make it, she did. The British Hotel was a hub of activity, a place where soldiers could momentarily forget the horrors of war. Mary's knack for business meant she could keep the hotel running, often dipping into her own pockets to ensure the soldiers were looked after. She sold provisions and served meals, creating a warm and welcoming atmosphere that was a balm for weary souls. Her success was not just a testament to her medical skills, but also to her shrewd business acumen, qualities that rarely get the spotlight when discussing historical heroes. Mary Seacole's story during the Crimean War is a chapter of resilience, ingenuity, and heart. While she may not have had the institutional support that made Nightingale a household name, her impact was felt deeply by those she cared for. She proved that real heroism doesn't always wear a uniform or get the headlines. It's often found in the small acts of kindness and the unwavering dedication to a cause greater than oneself. And with that, Mary's tale continues to unfold, leaving an indelible mark on the canvas of history, a mark that, despite the odds, refuses to fade. So, as the sun rose over the Crimean landscape, casting light on the muddy and beleaguered tents of soldiers, Mary Seacole was already knee-deep in the hustle and bustle of another day at the British Hotel. This wasn't your typical hotel with a mint on the pillow and room service at a button's press. Oh no, this was wartime innovation at its finest, a one-stop shop for sustenance, solace, and a dash of Seacole's signature warmth. Running the British Hotel was akin to conducting an orchestra where the instruments were parts, pans, and piles of medical supplies. Mary was nothing if not resourceful, and she needed to be, considering the economic gymnastics she had to perform daily. The cost of running such an operation was no small potatoes. Supplies were expensive and had to be shipped from far and wide, often at a premium due to the war. We're talking about prices that would make a Victorian gentleman clutch his wallet. Mary's ledger was a testament to her business acumen. She knew that the soldiers needed more than just a quick fix for their ailments. They craved a taste of home. Hence, her menu boasted items like beef stew and fresh bread, a comfort blanket in culinary form. A simple meal might cost $1 or $2, which was a bargain considering the alternative was hardtack and the endless gnaw of hunger. But Mary wasn't just about the bottom line. She often extended credit to those who couldn't afford to pay immediately, trusting that the goodwill she dispensed would eventually come back to her in kind. Her approach to healthcare was equally innovative. While doctors on the front lines were often hamstrung by a lack of resources and the constraints of military protocol, Mary had the freedom to blend traditional and modern practices. Her medical kit was a treasure trove of remedies. She had everything from mustard plasters to the latest in antiseptic treatments, a rarity in those pre-Listerian days. Imagine a soldier limping in with a bullet wound or a fever, only to find Mary ready to treat him with both a deft hand and a comforting smile. She wasn't just treating physical wounds, she was boosting morale, one patient at a time. And then there were her interactions with the troops. Mary's bedside manner was legendary, and it's no stretch to say she could charm the stripes off a sergeant's sleeve. Her rapport with the soldiers was built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of hardship. She would often joke with them, using humor as a balm as potent as any medicine. You can picture her, hands on hips, bantering with a group of soldiers over a steaming pot of soup, her laughter cutting through the gloom like a lighthouse beam. Officers, too, found solace at the British Hotel, and not just in the comforting arms of Mary's hospitality. Many were drawn to her pragmatic wisdom and her uncanny ability to navigate the complexities of war with an ease that bordered on the supernatural. She was a living testament to the idea that leadership sometimes looks more like a warm embrace than a cold command. Financially speaking, Mary was a whiz at keeping the books balanced. She knew her profit margins as well as she knew her patients' names. The British Hotel wasn't just a labor of love. It was a lesson in wartime economics where every penny counted. She had to negotiate deals for supplies, often haggling with suppliers who saw the conflict as a chance to make a quick buck. But Mary, with her tenacious spirit, never shied away from a challenge, economic or otherwise. Let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of Mary's endeavors. It wasn't just the physical demands of running the hotel that made her a standout figure. It was her ability to see opportunity amidst chaos. She wasn't just a nurse or a businesswoman. She was an institution unto herself, offering a sense of stability in an otherwise unpredictable world. The economic realities of the Crimean War were harsh. Inflation was rampant and resources scarce. Mary's ability to maintain her operations amidst such adversity was nothing short of miraculous. Her strategy involved a delicate balance. She had to keep prices fair for the soldiers while ensuring the hotel remained solvent. It was a high-wire act without a safety net, yet Mary walked it with the grace of a seasoned performer. As the war raged on, Mary's reputation grew. She became known not just as a caretaker, but as a vital part of the soldiers' lives. Her influence extended beyond the confines of the British Hotel. She was a living legend, the kind of person whose stories would be told around campfires long after the war had ended. Mary Seacole's story during the Crimean War is a testament to human resilience and the power of one person to make a difference. She was a pioneer, an entrepreneur, and a healer who defied the odds stacked against her. Her life was a masterclass in turning adversity into opportunity, a lesson that resonates just as strongly today as it did over a century ago. As the sun set on another day in Crimea, with the sounds of battle fading into the distance, Mary Seacole stood as a beacon of hope, her legacy cemented in the hearts of those she served. And while this part of her story draws to a close, the next chapter promises to reveal even more about the indomitable spirit of this remarkable woman. Stay tuned, because Mary Seacole's journey is far from over. As the ink dried on the Crimean War's final chapter, Mary Seacole packed up her British hotel, bid farewell to the soldiers she had come to regard as family, and looked toward England with a mix of hope and apprehension. The war had offered her a stage to display her unique blend of tenacity and compassion, but peace brought with it the harsh realities of civilian life. Returning to England, Mary found herself navigating a sea of financial woes, her once lucrative enterprise now a memory overshadowed by debts as persistent as a London fog. Let's not sugarcoat it. Mary was broke. Imagine, if you will, a woman who had single-handedly run a war-zone oasis, now grappling with bills piling up faster than you can say, Crimean conflict. Her financial troubles weren't just a case of post-war blues. They were a stark reminder of the societal hurdles faced by a woman of color in Victorian England. The establishment, which had been all too happy to turn a blind eye to her during the war, was now conveniently forgetting her contributions. Mary's financial decline culminated in a 1856 bankruptcy, a gut punch that would have left lesser mortals down for the count. But Mary was made of sterner stuff. Her bankruptcy was not just a personal setback. It was a reflection of the systemic barriers that women like her faced. In a society where class, race, and gender were the holy trinity of privilege, Mary was fighting an uphill battle armed with nothing but her indomitable spirit. Enter stage left William Howard Russell, the war correspondent whose pen was mightier than any sword. Russell, who had witnessed Mary's impact firsthand, took it upon himself to rally the public in her support. This wasn't just a charity case. It was a cause célèbre, a chance for the British public to acknowledge a woman who had given so much when the chips were down. So, a fundraising effort was launched, a Victorian equivalent of a Kickstarter campaign, if you will. The campaign to support Mary was a who's who of Victorian society, proving that even in an era beset by prejudice, there were those willing to put their money where their mouths were. Notable figures like Russell organized events and pushed for public donations, eventually raising enough to pull Mary back from the financial brink. It speaks volumes that it took a public outcry to rectify the neglect she faced from the very society she had served. But let's not get too misty-eyed here. Yes, the fundraising was a success, but it also highlighted a glaring reality. Mary Seacole's story was being romanticized even as she lived it. The narrative of the benevolent public coming to the aid of a deserving hero was a convenient cloak for the less savory truth. Her bankruptcy was as much a product of societal bias as financial misfortune. In 1857, Mary decided to take control of her own story by publishing her autobiography, Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands. It was a bold move, considering that Victorian women were generally expected to leave the writing to the menfolk. But Mary wasn't having any of that. She put pen to paper and laid bare her adventures, triumphs, and struggles, painting a vivid picture of her life with the kind of candor that would make even the most hardened editor blush. The autobiography was a hit, bringing Mary's story to the masses and solidifying her place in the annals of history. It was more than just a recounting of her experiences. It was a declaration of her identity, a reminder that she was not just a footnote in the Crimean War, but a chapter unto herself. In an era where women of color were often erased from the narrative, Mary's book was both a triumph and a testimony to her resilience. Societal attitudes toward race and gender, however, continued to cast long shadows. While Mary's contributions were finally gaining recognition, the underlying prejudices of the time were far from vanquished. The fact that she had to rely on the goodwill of others to restore her financial stability was a testament to the pervasive inequities of Victorian society. Mary Seacole's story is a microcosm of the larger struggles faced by women and minorities throughout history, an ongoing battle for recognition, equality, and the right to be seen as more than the sum of societal stereotypes. Her life was a masterclass in resilience, a testament to the power of one woman's determination to rise above the limitations imposed upon her. In the end, Mary Seacole wasn't just a pioneering nurse or a savvy entrepreneur. She was a force of nature, a woman who defied the odds and dared to write her own narrative. Her story is a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry woven from the lives of those who dared to dream beyond the confines of their time. As we turn the page to the next chapter in Mary's remarkable journey, we carry with us the lessons of her life, a testament to the enduring power of courage and compassion in the face of adversity. And so, Mary Seacole's indomitable spirit continued to ripple through history like a stone tossed into the pond of time. Her autobiography, Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands, was more than just a bestseller. It was a proclamation of independence, a literary mic drop that challenged the Victorian status quo. In an era when women, especially those of mixed race, were often relegated to the margins, Mary had dared to put herself front and center. She had written herself into the annals of history with all the flourish of a master storyteller. But let's take a step back and consider the broader impact of Mary's life. Her contributions to nursing and multicultural medicine were nothing short of revolutionary. Long before the word integrative became the darling of modern healthcare, Mary was blending traditional Jamaican remedies with European medical practices. She was the original fusion chef of the medical world, serving up health solutions with a side of cultural understanding. Mary's approach to medicine wasn't just about treating symptoms. It was about treating people. She understood that healthcare was as much about empathy as it was about expertise. Her methods were a precursor to what we now call patient-centered care, a concept that was as foreign to Victorian medicine as a smartphone would be to a caveman. In a world where doctors often treated patients like problems to be solved, Mary saw them as human beings to be healed. Her influence didn't end with her lifetime, though. Fast forward to the 21st century, and you'll find Mary Seacole's name emblazoned on buildings, statues, and awards. She has become a symbol of resilience and innovation, a reminder that the best healthcare transcends cultural boundaries and societal expectations. In 2004, Mary Seacole was posthumously awarded the Jamaican Order of Merit, recognizing her as a national heroine. Later, in 2016, a statue of her was unveiled at St. Thomas Hospital in London, the first in the UK to honor a named black woman. Not too shabby for someone once left off the official guest list of history. Now, let's dive into the debates that have swirled around her legacy, like seagulls around a picnic. Comparisons between Mary Seacole and Florence Nightingale have sparked heated discussions in academic circles and beyond. On one hand, you have Florence, the lady with the lamp, whose contributions to nursing are as well documented as they are lauded. On the other hand, there's Mary, whose hands-on approach and multicultural methods were often overshadowed by Nightingale's institutional clout. Some argue that Nightingale's work in sanitation and hospital reform laid the foundations for modern nursing, and they're not wrong. But the romanticized narrative often glosses over the fact that Florence had the backing of the British establishment, while Mary's efforts were largely self-funded and self-directed. If Nightingale was the establishment's darling, Mary was the people's champion, the underdog who refused to play by the rules. The push to recognize Mary Seacole's contributions has been part of a broader reassessment of historical narratives, a movement to shine a light on those who were marginalized, forgotten, or ignored. It's an ongoing process, fraught with complexities and debates about who gets to write history and who gets remembered. As we continue to dig through the layers of the past, we need to ask ourselves, whose stories are we still missing? And what biases are we carrying into our interpretations? Mary's story offers valuable lessons, not just about nursing, but about challenging societal norms. She was a pioneer in every sense of the word, breaking barriers of race, class, and gender with a tenacity that would make even the most hardened skeptic tip their hat. Her life is a testament to the power of resilience and innovation, a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes come from those who refuse to accept the status quo. In the end, Mary Seacole's legacy is not just about what she did, but about what she represents. She is a symbol of the countless individuals who have fought for recognition in a world that too often renders them invisible. Her story is a call to action, urging us to continue questioning the narratives we've inherited and to seek out the voices that have been silenced. As we close the book on Mary Seacole's remarkable journey, let's carry forward her spirit of compassion, courage, and curiosity. Let's honor her legacy not just with statues and awards, but with the ongoing commitment to create a world where everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, has the opportunity to make their mark on history. Because if there's one thing Mary taught us, it's that the true measure of a legacy is not in the accolades, but in the lives you touch and the changes you inspire. And with that, we tip our hats to Mary Seacole, a trailblazer whose light continues to guide us through the fog of history. So there you are, minding your own business in 12th century Europe, when suddenly the church decides it needs to get a grip on things. And by things, I mean your soul, your neighbor's beliefs, and frankly, anything else that seemed remotely heretical. Welcome to the medieval Inquisition, where the motto might as well have been conform or else. Let's rewind a bit and set the stage. It's the year 1184, and Europe is a patchwork quilt of kingdoms, duchies, and territories, each with its own local power struggles and ambitions. The Catholic Church, not one to be left out of the fun, is the overbearing aunt at the family reunion, making sure everyone is towing the line. But with new religious movements sprouting like medieval weeds, the church feels its authority slipping through the cracks. Enter the Inquisition, the church's not-so-gentle reminder that it's still in charge. The church's initial target, the Cathars, a group so radical they believed the material world was the work of an evil god. Talk about seeing the glass half empty. With their dualistic beliefs, the Cathars presented a theological conundrum. They were like the hipsters of their time, rejecting the mainstream church doctrines and opting for a purer, more ascetic lifestyle. They even had their own clergy, the perfects, who took vows of poverty and chastity. Imagine telling the local bishop that you found spirituality in a version of Christianity that bypasses his authority. Yeah, that conversation didn't go well. Southern France, particularly Languedoc, was the epicenter of this Cathar craze. This region was not just a geographical location. It was a cultural melting pot with a language and identity that set it apart from the rest of France. You can thank the Counts of Toulouse for their laissez-faire attitude towards religious diversity. They saw the Cathars as more of a curiosity than a threat, which, spoiler alert, was not a popular opinion in Rome. In 1184, Pope Lucius Roman III issued the papal bull Ad Abolendum, effectively launching the Inquisition by calling for the eradication of heresy. This was less of a gentle nudge and more of a medieval smackdown. Now, let's debunk a popular myth. The Inquisition wasn't just a medieval version of whack-a-mole where everyone got accused of heresy. The church's reach was vast, but it wasn't omnipotent. It took time, resources, and let's be honest, a bit of creative accounting to pursue heretics. This wasn't some all-consuming witch hunt. Yet, think of the Inquisition as the church's way of saying, we're serious about this whole orthodoxy thing. It was a mix of religious fervor and practical politics. The church needed to assert its power, especially when kings and emperors were more interested in earthly conquests than spiritual salvation. The Inquisition was more than just a religious tool. It was a political weapon. The Cathars, with their growing influence and anti-materialist doctrines, threatened not just the church's spiritual authority, but also its economic interests. After all, if people stopped tithing, who would pay for the grand cathedrals and elaborate vestments? Now, you might think the church would send its army of priests to handle this. But no, they outsourced the job to local bishops, who were about as enthusiastic about this task as a cat about a bath. These bishops were supposed to identify heretics and bring them to justice, but many were either too busy with their own power games or simply lacked the resources. Enter the Dominicans and Franciscans, the church's answer to a growing problem. These orders were like the spiritual Navy SEAL, dispatched to root out heresy with a zealotry that was both impressive and terrifying. But let's not romanticize the Inquisition as some kind of medieval detective agency. It was more like a series of unfortunate events with a high rate of false positives. People were encouraged to denounce their neighbors, which, unsurprisingly, led to a lot of personal vendettas being dressed up as piety. Got a grudge against your neighbor for stealing your chickens? Just accuse them of heresy. Problem solved. For you, not so much for them. So, what was it about the Cathars that got them on the church's hit list? Well, their rejection of the sacraments was a biggie. If you're the church, and your entire business model relies on people believing in the spiritual efficacy of the sacraments, someone declaring them null and void is bad for business. The Cathars also challenged the church's authority by claiming their own clergy were more legitimate. Essentially, they were running a spiritual startup in a world dominated by a religious monopoly. And while we're myth-busting, let's address the elephant in the room: torture. Yes, it was part of the Inquisition's toolkit, but it wasn't as widely used in the early days as later sensational accounts suggest. Torture was more of a last resort, used when other methods of persuasion failed. Think of it as the medieval version of turning up the heat during an interrogation, not the first move, but always on the table. In the beginning, the Inquisition's actions were more about reconciling heretics with the Church than punishing them. If you confessed and repented, you'd often get off with a penance, like fasting or a pilgrimage, but refuse to recant, and you might find yourself contemplating the afterlife a bit sooner than planned. The Inquisition wasn't just about religious purity. It was deeply entangled with the power dynamics of the day. The Catholic Church was not only a spiritual institution, but also a temporal power with lands, wealth, and influence. Heresy threatened that power structure, and the Inquisition was the Church's way of not just defending its faith, but its very survival. And if you thought this was just a Catholic affair, think again. Secular rulers were all too happy to support the Inquisition when it suited their purposes. After all, a unified religious front often meant a more stable realm. Plus, there was the added bonus of confiscating the property of convicted heretics. Who says righteousness doesn't pay? So, as you tuck yourself into your straw mattress tonight, be thankful you're not living in a time when a casual conversation about spiritual beliefs could land you in a dank cell or worse. The Inquisition was the Church's way of saying, we care deeply about your soul, but we're willing to break a few bones to save it. It's a harsh reminder that in the medieval world, the line between faith and power was as thin as a parchment scroll. Now, where were we? Ah, yes. The Church's bone-crunching love affair with orthodoxy. Let's delve a bit deeper into the nitty-gritty of the Inquisition's playbook, shall we? Fasten your seatbelt, because we're diving headfirst into the bureaucratic quagmire that was the evolution of inquisitorial procedures. Spoiler alert, it's more red tape than you'll find in a modern tax return. First off, let's talk about the Edict of Grace. The Church, ever the benevolent overlord, decided that sometimes a little bit of carrot was needed before they brought out the stick. The Edict of Grace was essentially a divine plea deal. It gave heretics a 30-day window to confess their sins voluntarily, throw themselves at the mercy of the Church, and receive a relatively light sentence. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a get-out-of-jail-free card, but with more fasting and less monopoly money. But here's the kicker. Confessing wasn't as straightforward as it seemed. If you admitted to heresy, you'd be expected to rat out your fellow heretics. It was like a spiritual version of Survivor, where alliances were made and broken faster than you could say, Amen. The Church cleverly turned confession into a tool for gathering intel, and as for those who hesitated, well, let's just say the Church had ways to jog their memory. Now, if the Edict of Grace sounds like an invitation to clear the soul, the reality was a bit more sinister. It was less about redemption and more about intelligence gathering. The Church wasn't just interested in your personal sins. They wanted names, dates, and the heretical dirt on your entire social circle. Imagine being coerced into betraying cousin Pierre because he once expressed doubt about the virgin birth over a tankard of ale. Not exactly the family bonding experience you were hoping for. And speaking of coercion, let's address the elephant in the torture chamber. The Inquisition wasn't exactly known for its subtlety. While today's legal systems operate on the presumption of innocence, the Inquisition had a rather different approach. Think guilty until proven innocent with a dash of medieval flair. Torture wasn't just a method, it was practically an art form. They had a smorgasbord of techniques at their disposal, from the rack, which stretched bodies like medieval taffy, to more refined methods like waterboarding. Yes, waterboarding. It's been around longer than your grandma's recipe for apple pie. But before you picture every inquisitor as a sadistic madman, let's add a dash of nuance. Torture was legally justified on the grounds that it was a means to extract the truth, a dubious logic if ever there was one. It was supposed to be a last resort, but as you can imagine, in a world where scientific rigor was about as common as unicorns, last resort was a pretty flexible term. Torture was limited by law to only half an hour, but fun fact, no one brought a stopwatch to these sessions, and the rules were more like friendly suggestions. Now, let's ponder the economic motivations behind all this righteous fury. The Inquisition wasn't just about saving souls, it was also a rather lucrative business model. Heresy trials often led to confiscation of property. If you were found guilty, your estate was fair game. This was a win-win situation, for the Church at least. They got rid of a pesky heretic, and added a new wing to the local cathedral with the spoils. And if you were inclined to think this was just a religious endeavor, think again. Secular authorities were often eager to support the Inquisition, not out of piety, but because a piece of the confiscated pie often found its way into their own coffers. Let's not forget the political backdrop. The Inquisition was a handy tool for consolidating power. It wasn't just about stamping out heresy. It was about reinforcing the Church's dominance in a world where power was often as ephemeral as a medieval diet. The Church and secular rulers were like two sides of the same coin, each using the other to maintain control. If a local baron was getting too cozy with heretical ideas, the Inquisition was a useful cudgel to bring him back in line. And what about the poor souls caught in this draconian net? Well, they were often at the mercy of inquisitors who were less Sherlock Holmes and more Judge Judy. Evidence was flimsy at best, often based on hearsay or the fevered imagination of a particularly zealous neighbor. It was a system ripe for abuse, and abuse it they did. The Church's zeal for purity was matched only by their appetite for control. In the end, the Inquisition was as much about power and money as it was about faith. It was a complex dance of politics, religion, and economics, a medieval Game of Thrones without the dragons. But as we continue to peel back the layers of this ecclesiastical onion, remember, the tale of the Inquisition is far from over. There's more to uncover, and trust me, it's not all doom and gloom. Well, maybe a little more gloom. As we delve further into this tangled web, remember to keep your wits sharp and your sense of humor intact. The Inquisition was a brutal chapter in history, but it's also a reminder of the lengths to which people will go in the name of belief and power. So, stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll unravel more of this medieval mystery and perhaps find a little light amidst the darkness. So, as we lace up our medieval boots and trudge deeper into this labyrinth of faith, politics, and power, let's shine a spotlight on some of the Inquisition's star performers. And by star performers, I mean the guys whose names you'd rather not see on your caller ID. Enter Tomás de Torquemada, the poster child for the Spanish Inquisition, and the man who made witch hunts as popular as avocado toast is today. Torquemada, a Dominican friar with a penchant for order and orthodoxy, was appointed the Grand Inquisitor in 1483. His mission, purge Spain of heresy with the enthusiasm of a teenager on a caffeine high. But it wasn't just about spiritual purity. It was also about consolidating power for the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella. They were the power couple of the 15th century, and they used the Inquisition like a medieval Swiss army knife to unify Spain's religious landscape under one creed, Catholicism. Under Torquemada's watch, the Inquisition didn't just expand, it exploded. Over 2,000 people were burned at the stake during his tenure, and that's not counting those who faced other, slightly less fiery fates. But Torquemada wasn't just about the flames. He was also a master of bureaucracy. He established a network of tribunals across Spain, standardizing procedures and making sure that heresy could be sniffed out as efficiently as possible. Think of it as a franchise model for religious persecution. But why was the Inquisition such a big deal in Spain? Well, it had a lot to do with the Reconquista, the centuries-long effort to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule. By 1492, yes, the same year Columbus sailed the ocean blue, Spain had finally finished this epic game of territorial chess. But with the Muslims gone, the Catholic monarchs turned their attention to another perceived threat, the Jews. Sure, many had converted to Christianity, but the monarchs were suspicious that these conversos might still secretly practice Judaism. Enter Torquemada, who saw an opportunity to test just how devout these new Christians really were. Now, you might think that the Inquisition was just about rooting out religious dissent, but it had an economic dimension too. Confiscating the property of convicted heretics was quite the lucrative side hustle. Ferdinand and Isabella were more than happy to fill their coffers with the seized wealth of those who failed the orthodoxy test. After all, someone had to pay for Columbus's little adventure across the Atlantic. And speaking of tests, let's dive into the bizarre criteria for heresy accusations. Forget about logical evidence. We're talking about a system where a bad haircut could be your downfall. Did you skip church? Heresy. Refused to eat pork? Heresy. Owned a book that wasn't the Bible? You guessed it. Heresy. It was like living in a world where every eccentricity or personal quirk could land you in hot water. For example, if you were accused of being a heretic, your trial was more Kafkaesque than courtroom drama. You wouldn't even know who your accuser was. It could be your neighbor, your tailor, or even that guy who sells you bread. The Inquisition thrived on anonymity and secrecy. Witnesses could remain unnamed, which meant personal grudges often masqueraded as religious fervor. The accused had to defend themselves without knowing the charges in detail. Imagine being handed a blindfold and being told to find your way out of a maze. And let's not forget the role of religion and politics in this whole spectacle. Monarchs used the Inquisition to strengthen their grip on power, aligning themselves with the church to legitimize their rule. After all, nothing says divine right like having the church's stamp of approval. In this tangled web of alliances, the Inquisition was a political tool as much as a religious one. It was a way to consolidate authority, quell dissent, and maintain control over a populace that might otherwise get a bit too independent-minded. The trials themselves were less about justice and more about spectacle. They were public events, drawing crowds like a medieval reality TV show. The accused were paraded in front of an audience, their sins read aloud for all to hear. It was a public shaming ritual that doubled as a warning to anyone else thinking of straying from the fold. And if you were found guilty, the sentence was often carried out in a public auto da fe, a ceremony that was equal parts religious service and public execution. Talk about mixing business with pleasure. But let's not pin all the blame on Torquemada and Spain. The Inquisition was a European phenomenon, and it was used by various rulers to enforce conformity and control. In France, the Cathars were the primary targets, while in Germany and Northern Europe, witch hunts became the flavor of the century. The criteria for witchcraft were as arbitrary as those for heresy. Did you own a black cat? Witch. Did your neighbor's cow start giving milk after you walked by? Witch. It was a system ripe for abuse, and abuse it they did, with tens of thousands of women falling victim to the hysteria. Yet, amidst all this darkness, there's a strange allure to the Inquisition's story. It's a tale of power and belief, of how faith can be twisted into a weapon, and how politics can masquerade as piety. It's a reminder of the lengths to which humans will go to maintain control and the absurdities that arise when fear overrides reason. So, as we continue this journey through the annals of history, remember that the Inquisition is more than just a cautionary tale. It's a mirror reflecting the eternal dance between power and faith. And with that, let's leave the burning stakes and shadowy tribunals behind for now. There's more to uncover, and trust me, the next chapter is going to be as riveting as a medieval joust. So stay tuned, keep your wits about you, and maybe check under your bed for inquisitors before you nod off tonight. Because history, as they say, has a way of repeating itself in the most unexpected of ways. As we navigate away from the fiery spectacles and shadowy tribunals, let's peer into the quieter, yet equally tumultuous, corridors where the Inquisition left its mark. Picture a world where the very act of thinking differently could land you in a heap of trouble. We're diving into the realm of intellectual freedom, or rather, the lack thereof, thanks to our friends at the Inquisition. You might think of the Middle Ages as a time when the arts and sciences were flourishing in their own quirky way, with monks scribbling illuminated manuscripts and scholars pondering the mysteries of the cosmos. But hold that thought. The Inquisition, with all its zealous fervor, wasn't exactly a patron of free thought. In fact, it was more like the medieval version of a buskill at a brainstorming session. You're pondering the mysteries of the universe, and suddenly, boom, you're accused of heresy. The church had its reasons, of course. Intellectual freedom was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it could lead to innovations and new interpretations of religious texts. On the other, it could spawn ideas that challenged the church's authority. And we know how the church felt about challenges. They preferred their believers like their cathedrals, unwavering and firmly in place. Take the case of Galileo Galilei, who had the audacity to suggest that the earth revolved around the sun. Sure, this was a few centuries later, during the Roman Inquisition, but the spirit was the same. Galileo's heliocentric model wasn't just a scientific theory. It was a theological bombshell. It dared to suggest that maybe, just maybe, the universe didn't revolve around human beings, and by extension, the church. Naturally, this didn't sit well with the ecclesiastical hierarchy. Galileo was tried for heresy in 1633 and spent the rest of his days under house arrest, a prisoner of his own genius. But let's step back into the medieval period, where the church's iron grip stifled not just science, but the arts as well. Imagine being a troubadour in Languedoc, strumming your lute and singing songs that didn't toe the orthodox line. You might find yourself out of a gig, or worse, in a cell. Art was a powerful medium for expression and dissent, and the church knew it. They kept a keen eye on artists and writers, ensuring that their works didn't stray into dangerous territory. In a way, the Inquisition was the original censorship board, wielding power over the creative minds of the time. Now, let's not paint the church entirely as the villain here. There was a method to their madness. The Middle Ages were a time of great uncertainty, with wars, plagues, and famines making the future about as predictable as a roll of the dice. The church provided a semblance of stability and order, a spiritual constant in a world full of chaos. But maintaining that order came at a cost, and that cost was freedom, intellectual, artistic, and personal. And where there's control, there's often money. The Inquisition was not just a spiritual purge, it was a financial boon. Heresy trials were expensive affairs, but they paid off handsomely. Once accused and convicted, a heretic's property was up for grabs. The church took a hefty slice, but they weren't the only ones feasting at the table. Local lords and monarchs got their cut, too. It was a symbiotic relationship where the church and state both prospered from the spoils of heresy. Think of it as a medieval version of a hostile takeover, with land and wealth changing hands under the guise of religious purity. Let's add another layer to this intricate tapestry: the social control. In a world where literacy was a luxury and news traveled at the speed of a horse, the church's word was gospel, quite literally. The Inquisition served as a powerful tool to silence dissent and enforce conformity. It wasn't just about burning books or imprisoning thinkers. It was about instilling fear. The fear that any deviation from the norm could lead to public shame, financial ruin, or worse. It was a chilling reminder that obedience wasn't just expected, it was demanded. This brings us to the myth of the Inquisition as a rogue operation, a band of zealous clerics running amok. The truth is far more structured and insidious. The Inquisition was a well-oiled machine, with networks of informants and a bureaucracy that would make modern governments blush. It was systemic control, with each cog in the machine working to maintain the church's grip on power. And while we often chuckle at the absurdity of some heresy accusations, it's worth remembering that for those caught in the Inquisition's web, it was deadly serious. In many ways, the Inquisition was a precursor to modern surveillance states, where the mere act of thinking differently was enough to make you a target. It's easy to romanticize the past, to see the Middle Ages as a time of knights and chivalry, but the reality was often far darker. The Inquisition serves as a stark reminder of the lengths to which those in power will go to maintain their position and suppress dissent. As we unravel the threads of this historical tapestry, it's clear that the Inquisition's legacy is a complex one. It's a story of faith and fear, of power and control, of human frailty and institutional might. It's a tale that echoes through the centuries, reminding us of the dangers of unchecked authority and the price of conformity. And while we might be tempted to laugh at the absurdities of the past, let's not forget the very real human cost. The Inquisition was a dark chapter in history, but it's also a mirror reflecting our own times. As we continue this journey through the annals of history, let's keep our wits sharp and our minds open. Because if there's one lesson to be learned, it's that history has a way of repeating itself, often when we least expect it. So, as we prepare to delve further into this tangled web of faith and power, let's keep our eyes peeled for the next twist in this medieval saga. There's more to uncover, and trust me, the story is far from over. The Inquisition may be a relic of the past, but its echoes are still felt today. Stay tuned, because the next chapter is going to be as riveting as A Knight's Tale, with just a touch more reality. And so, as we stride into the twilight of the Inquisition, we find ourselves grappling with its shadowy legacy. It's a tale that's about as uplifting as a medieval dentist visit, but it's one that demands our attention. The Inquisition didn't just fizzle out overnight. It was more of a slow, awkward fade, like the last guest at a party who doesn't quite get the hint. By the 18th century, the Enlightenment was casting its rational glow over Europe, and the Inquisition's medieval antics were starting to look embarrassingly passé. You see, the Inquisition was a product of its time, a time when spiritual authority was wielded like a cudgel, and questioning the status quo was akin to asking for a one-way ticket to the local dungeon. But as Europe began to embrace reason, science, and those pesky ideas about human rights, the Church's iron grip started to loosen. Secular rulers, who once found the Inquisition a convenient tool, were now eyeing it with suspicion. They realized that a little freedom of thought might actually boost their realm's prosperity. Who knew that letting people think for themselves could be good for business? Take Spain, for instance. By the early 19th century, the Spanish Inquisition was as welcome as a bull in a china shop. Napoleon's invasion in 1808 gave the Inquisition a knockout punch, and by 1834, it was officially abolished. The times were eight-shangin', and even the most die-hard inquisitors couldn't stop the tide of modernity. The last official execution by the Spanish Inquisition took place in 1826, when a schoolteacher named Cayetano Ripoll was hanged for heresy. His crime, teaching deism. Yeah, not exactly the crime of the century. But while the Inquisition's official apparatus crumbled, its mythos was just getting started. Fast forward to today, and you'd think the Inquisition was a medieval version of a horror flick, complete with dungeons, torture devices, and ominous hooded figures. Pop culture has had a field day with this narrative, painting the Inquisition as a time when every third person was a secret heretic, and every other building a torture chamber. Never mind that historical records show only a fraction of inquisitorial trials actually ended in an execution. The truth is, the Inquisition was more bureaucratic nightmare than bloodbath. Let's talk numbers for a moment. Estimates suggest that during the Spanish Inquisition's 3-century run, about 150,000 people were tried as heretics, with roughly 3,000-5,000 executions. Now, don't get me wrong. Those numbers aren't exactly a hallmark card, but compared to the popular image of the Inquisition as a medieval slaughterhouse, it's clear that reality and myth have taken divergent paths. The Inquisition was more about fear and control than mass extermination. And what about the lessons learned? The Inquisition leaves us with a stark reminder of what happens when power and belief mix like oil and water. It's a tale of caution, warning us of the dangers inherent when institutional authority goes unchecked. The very idea that a single entity could dictate what was acceptable to think, say, or believe is enough to make any modern mind squirm. Yet, here we are, centuries later, still grappling with issues of censorship and freedom. It's a sobering thought that perhaps we haven't strayed as far from our inquisitorial past as we'd like to believe. The Inquisition's enduring fascination isn't just about the gruesome details, though those certainly add to the mystique. It's about the eternal struggle between orthodoxy and innovation, between fear and freedom. It's about the human penchant for control and the lengths to which we'll go to maintain it. And yes, it's about the absurdity of it all, the idea that something as intangible as belief could wield such tangible power. So, as we close this chapter on the Inquisition, let's do so with a sense of perspective. It's easy to see it as a relic of a bygone era, but its echoes are still heard today. The Inquisition reminds us of the importance of vigilance, of questioning authority, and of cherishing the freedoms that, for many, were once nothing more than a dangerous dream. It's a legacy as complex as the human condition itself, both a cautionary tale and a call to action. In the end, the Inquisition was as much about the politics of belief as it was about faith itself. It was a dance of power and piety, a medieval opera with enough drama to fill 1,000 history books. And yet, for all its darkness, it offers us a glimmer of hope. The Inquisition's decline was not just the end of an era. It was the beginning of a new chapter where the light of reason began to outshine the shadows of dogma. As we walk away from this historical labyrinth, let's carry with us the knowledge that history, while often grim, is also a testament to human resilience. The Inquisition may have been a dark chapter, but it was also a stepping stone, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the seeds of change are waiting to burst forth. After all, history is nothing if not the story of our relentless pursuit of progress, one heresy at a time. Your day kicks off in a Roman villa with the sound of clinking dishes and the chatter of slaves readying the morning feast. You're in a world where luxury is as common as the olive trees dotting the countryside. But before you get too comfortable in your toga, let's peel back the layers of marble and mosaics to see what really makes this villa tick. First off, let's talk architecture, because this villa is no ordinary pile of bricks. It's a testament to Roman ingenuity, featuring the hypocaust system, basically the ancient Roman version of underfloor heating. Yeah, that's right, central heating in the 1st century. Your ancestors were shivering in their huts, while you, dear Roman, are basking in the warm glow of innovation. The hypocaust channels hot air from a furnace through the floors and walls, ensuring every corner of your home is toasty, even when the Mediterranean breeze gets a bit too brisk. As you wander through the atrium, the central courtyard of your villa, the open space is designed to impress. Marble statues stand guard like silent sentinels, while a small impluvium, a sunken basin, collects rainwater at the center. The atrium isn't just for show. It's the beating heart of the Roman home where business meets pleasure. But let's not get too starry-eyed. All this opulence has a backbone, and it's not as pretty as the frescoes on the walls. The wealth that fuels this lavish lifestyle largely comes from agriculture. Your estate likely stretches across acres, growing wheat, olives, and grapes, the holy trinity of Roman sustenance. But here's the kicker. Much of the labor comes from slaves. Rome's economy is heavily reliant on slavery, and it's a system that allows the elite to sip their wine in marble-clad dining rooms while others toil in the fields. It's a stark contrast, and a reminder that the villa's grandeur is built on a foundation of inequality. Speaking of inequality, let's debunk some classic myths about Roman luxury. You might think of Romans as constantly reclining at decadent feasts, but that's more myth than reality for most. Sure, banquets happen, but day-to-day meals are simple. Bread, cheese, fruits, maybe some fish or meat if you're high up the social ladder. It's more survival than splendor, except on special occasions when your dining room becomes a stage for excess. The villa itself, while impressive, is also a symbol of status. Owning such a home is a mark of power, a nod to the gods of architecture that you've made it in the Roman world. But let's not gloss over the fact that this lifestyle is reserved for a privileged few. The vast majority of Romans were crammed into insulae, essentially ancient apartment blocks, where privacy was a luxury, not a given. So while you roam these spacious halls, remember the echoes of those who live on the fringes of this opulence. Now, here's a juicy tidbit. Villas like yours also serve as economic powerhouses. They aren't just homes, they're microcosms of Roman industry. Your villa might house workshops producing goods like olive oil or wine, a testament to Rome's commercial spirit. And these aren't small operations. Large villas could employ hundreds of slaves and freemen, turning out products that would travel across the empire. It's a well-oiled machine, literally and figuratively, keeping the wheels of Roman economy turning. But let's pause on this economic engine and talk ethics. The villa stands as a monument to human achievement, yet it also raises uncomfortable questions about the cost of luxury. Slavery is the elephant in the room, a system that fuels prosperity for some while condemning others to lives of servitude. It's a paradox that underscores much of Roman life, where the grandeur you see is often just a veneer over harsher realities. As the day unfolds, take a moment to appreciate the artistry around you. The frescoes lining the walls, vibrant with colors derived from crushed minerals, tell stories of gods and heroes. These images aren't just decoration. They are propaganda, reinforcing the values and myths that underpin Roman society. And while you might find them beautiful, remember they're as much about asserting cultural dominance as they are about aesthetics. The villa, in all its splendor and complexity, is a snapshot of Roman life. It's a place where wealth and innovation meet exploitation and inequity, creating a world as vibrant as it is contradictory. So as you sip your morning pasca, a diluted vinegar drink popular among soldiers and laborers, and a surprisingly effective thirst quencher, take a moment to consider the layers of history around you. Because in this villa, every stone, column, and mosaic has a story to tell, if only you're willing to listen. As you savor that oddly satisfying pasca, let's dive deeper into the daily rhythm of life in a Roman villa, shall we? Picture this. You're waking up to the aroma of bread baking, wafting through the halls, a scent as comforting as it is ancient. Breakfast in the Roman villa isn't about eggs Benedict and bottomless mimosas. Instead, you're looking at a humble spread of bread, honey, and maybe some olives. If you're feeling particularly fancy, You might add a touch of cheese or fruit. This simplicity is deceiving, though, because even this breakfast staple is the result of a labor-intensive process. Consider the bread. It's not just any loaf from the corner bakery. It's crafted from wheat grown on your estate, harvested by countless hands, and ground into flour by slaves or freedmen. And honey, well, that's a whole different story, involving beekeeping practices that were surprisingly sophisticated. Romans were masters at this sweet alchemy, with hives scattered across the countryside. Talk about farm-to-table dining, 1st century style. Now, let's talk about your household staff. Think of them as the original multitaskers, juggling roles that range from domestic duties to estate management. The villicus, or overseer, is the unsung hero here, managing the day-to-day operations of the villa. He's the guy who ensures the bread is baked, the floors are swept, and the vineyards are pruned. Meanwhile, the villica, his female counterpart, oversees the domestic sphere, spinning, weaving, and the all-important task of ensuring the wine amphorae are always full. It's a dynamic duo that keeps the villa from descending into chaos. But don't for a second think these roles are interchangeable. The Roman household is a well-oiled machine, with each cog fitting perfectly into its place. In a society where hierarchy is everything, even the staff has its pecking order. Slaves who work inside the villa are considered more fortunate than their agrarian counterparts, who toil under the sun's relentless glare. It's a brutal reality, and one that underscores the privilege of your leisurely breakfast. After breakfast, your day might include a trip to the bathhouse, a social ritual as essential as morning coffee is today. The Roman baths are the epicenter of gossip, business, and relaxation. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of a country club, minus the golf course. These baths are technological marvels, with their own sophisticated heating systems, similar to the hypocaust in your villa. You start in the tepidarium, a warm room that's the perfect precursor to the coldarium, where the heat really kicks in. The finale, a plunge into the frigidarium, a cold pool that's the Roman version of a brisk morning dip. Refreshing, right? However, the baths are more than just a place to scrub up. They're a melting pot of Roman society where senators rub shoulders with merchants and philosophers debate with soldiers. It's here that the art of patronage truly shines. Patronage is the lifeblood of Roman social structure, a complex system of mutual obligation and support. As a villa owner, you're both a patron and a client, offering support to those below you while seeking favors from those above. It's a delicate dance, one that requires a keen understanding of social dynamics and a well-timed compliment or two. Speaking of social dynamics, let's tackle the myth of Roman leisure. Sure, the image of reclined Romans nibbling grapes is iconic, but it's a bit of a historical mirage. In reality, life in a Roman villa is a constant hustle, driven by the need to maintain your status and wealth. The villa's economic engine doesn't run on air. It requires hands, many of them, to keep it turning. This is where the labor economy comes into play, a relentless machine fueled by human toil. Consider the vineyards that produce your wine. Each grapevine requires care and attention, from pruning to harvesting to pressing. The olives that produce your oil are no different. It's a process that requires expertise and effort, dispelling the notion of effortless abundance. Every drop of oil, every glass of wine, is the result of countless hours of labor, often under conditions we'd balk at today. Yet, this labor is the backbone of the Roman economy, an unflinching testament to the human cost of luxury. But let's not get too caught up in the drudgery. There's a certain romantic allure to the Roman villa, a sense of grandeur that's hard to ignore. The mosaics underfoot, crafted from thousands of tiny tiles, tell tales of myth and legend. They're masterpieces in their own right, and while they serve as impressive decor, they also function as status symbols, literal stepping stones of wealth. As we stroll through your villa, it's clear that every aspect of life here is designed to reinforce your place in the social hierarchy. From the breakfast table to the bathhouse, every ritual is a reminder of your status and the obligations that come with it. It's a complex web of power and prestige, where each interaction is a thread that could unravel at any moment. So as you prepare to face the rest of your day, take a moment to consider the layers of history beneath your feet. This villa, with all its splendor and contradictions, is a snapshot of a world long gone yet eerily familiar. A place where the pursuit of luxury is tempered by the harsh realities of labor. and where every pleasure comes at a cost. As you ponder this, remember that in the Roman world, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. Now that we've taken a deep breath of the Roman villa's intoxicating blend of luxury and labor, let's saunter over to the kitchen and garden, where the magic, and sometimes madness, of Roman culinary practices unfolds. Imagine a space bustling with the energy of cooks, slaves, and the occasional overseer, all orchestrating the daily feast. If you're picturing a scene straight out of a cooking show, think again. This kitchen is less Master Chef and more Hell's Kitchen, minus the reality TV cameras and Scottish chefs screaming about undercooked risotto. First off, let's talk about what's on the Roman menu. Spoiler alert, it's not all peacock tongues and dormice stuffed with minced pork. That's mostly the stuff of legend, or of Seneca's more sarcastic satires. Day-to-day Roman dining is a bit more grounded. The staples, bread, olives, and wine, make up the holy trifecta of Roman sustenance. Throw in some garum, a fermented fish sauce that could knock your socks off, and you've got a meal that's more earthy than ethereal. But what truly jazzes up Roman cuisine are the spices and herbs. We're talking coriander, mint, and thyme, along with more exotic imports like pepper and cumin. These flavors journey thousands of miles along the Silk Road, from the far-flung reaches of India to the Roman table. In today's cash, you're looking at an eye-watering cost akin to buying a luxury car. A pound of pepper could set you back 300 denarii. That's more than a laborer's annual wage. Talk about putting your money where your mouth is. Now, you might wonder, how sustainable were these culinary extravagances? Here's a hint, not very. The Roman Empire's appetite for exotic goods strained the supply lines and drained coffers faster than you can say Pax Romana. The logistics alone would make a modern supply chain manager break out in hives. Yet, the allure of faraway flavors was a status symbol, a way for the elite to flaunt their wealth with every lavish bite. Speaking of lavish, let's wade through the myth of the decadent Roman banquet. You know the scene: opulent dining rooms, guests reclining on couches, and a spectacle of food that would make even the most gluttonous among us hesitate. While these feasts did happen, they were more about politics than pleasure. Dinner party in Rome was less about feeding your friends and more about networking. Think LinkedIn with a side of roasted boar. The real kicker: the host's reputation was on the line with every dish served. A misstep could mean social suicide, as Roman society was as brutal as it was refined. And let's not forget the entertainment, which ranged from philosophical debates to performances that would be right at home in the Colosseum. It's a high-stakes game of culinary chess, where each course is a calculated move designed to impress. Now, about those ancient Roman cookbooks, don't let them fool you. Take Apicius, a famous Roman gourmand. His recipes read like a cross between a chemistry experiment and a dare. While they provide a tantalizing glimpse into Roman tastes, they're less practical guide and more culinary fantasy. The average Roman cook would have neither the time nor the resources to pull off such gastronomic feats. Instead, they made do with what was available, crafting meals that were as much about sustenance as they were about skill. Back in the garden, the villa's green thumb is hard at work. This is where the magic begins, growing everything from cabbages and onions to the herbs that would spice up any mundane meal. The villa garden isn't just about aesthetics. It's a vital part of the household economy, a verdant lifeline that ensures the pantry stays stocked. It's a self-sustaining system, relying heavily on the labor of those who tend to it, often working from dawn until dusk. Yet, the garden is also a microcosm of Roman society, meticulously planned, hierarchical, and not without its share of weeds. It reflects the Roman ethos of order and control, where even nature is bent to the will of the empire. But while the garden might thrive, the question of sustainability looms large. As Roman villas expand, and the demand for luxury goods grows, the strain on resources tells a tale as old as civilization itself. The endless pursuit of more, often at the cost of the land and those who cultivate it. As our culinary tour draws to a close, it's clear that Roman dining is a complex affair, steeped in tradition, yet driven by the relentless push for novelty and prestige. It's a world where every meal is a statement, every ingredient a symbol, and every banquet a stage. This kitchen and garden, with their whispers of spices and rustle of leaves, are testament to the empire's insatiable appetite for growth and glory. So, as you mull over the flavors of the past, Remember that the Roman villa kitchen is more than just a place of nourishment. It's a crucible of culture, economy, and power. And while the plates may have cleared, the story of Roman cuisine is far from over. As we continue our exploration, prepare to uncover more layers of this rich tapestry, where history is seasoned with both splendor and struggle. Now that we've unpeeled the layers of Roman culinary intrigue, let's pivot from the kitchen's clatter to the more cerebral pursuits of a Roman villa. Afternoon sunlight filters through the villa's colonnades as you step into the intellectual heart of this grand residence. It's time to dive headfirst into the world of Roman culture and education, where marble busts, scrolls, and the art philosopher form the backdrop of your enlightened afternoon. First stop, the villa's library. But before you get too excited, let's temper those expectations. This isn't your neighborhood library with rows upon rows of neatly shelved books. Instead, imagine a room lined with niches and cabinets, housing scrolls wrapped in leather or linen. These scrolls are the ancient equivalent of bestsellers, whether they're copies of Virgil's Aeneid or Cicero's philosophical musings. If you're feeling particularly bold, you might even find the risque poetry of Ovid tucked away for private perusal. The Romans knew how to blend business with pleasure, and their libraries were no exception. A villa's library was as much a status symbol as it was an educational resource. Owning a vast collection of scrolls wasn't just about being well-read. It was about flaunting intellectual wealth. We're talking about a society where knowledge is power, and a library brimming with scrolls is like having a Maserati parked in the driveway. It's a place where the elite could gather to debate, discuss, and occasionally disparage their rivals' taste in literature. But don't be fooled by the romantic notion of universal literacy. The truth is, Roman education was a privilege reserved for the upper echelons of society, while the sons of wealthy villa owners might be tutored by Greek slaves. Considered the gold standard in education, most Romans were too busy working to indulge in academic pursuits. The literacy rate in the Roman Empire hovered around 10%, which means that for every learned senator reciting Homer, there were 9 others who couldn't tell their alpha from their omega. Speaking of education, let's talk about the Roman approach to learning. It was practical, to say the least. Forget the abstract pondering we associate with Greek philosophy. Roman education was utilitarian, designed to produce effective administrators, soldiers, and orators. The curriculum was heavy on rhetoric and law, light on creativity. Think less Dead Poets Society and more Law and Order, Roman edition. The emphasis was on honing skills that would bolster Rome's imperial ambitions, not nurturing budding artists or dreamers. And here's where we debunk another myth, the idea of the universally enlightened Roman. While the Romans admired Greek culture, they were pragmatists at heart. Their appreciation for art and philosophy was often tempered by a healthy dose of utilitarianism. Take, for example, their sculptures. Sure, they loved a good marble statue, but these were more than just pretty faces. Statues served as political propaganda, reinforcing the power and prestige of the elite. Each chiseled jawline and heroic pose was a reminder of Rome's supremacy and the individual's place within it. Now, onto the art, specifically the frescoes that adorn the villa's walls. These vibrant murals weren't just eye candy. They were conversation starters, intended to impress guests and intimidate rivals. They depicted mythological scenes, historical events, and occasionally the villa owner's own exploits. Subtle, right, but these artistic endeavors weren't purely altruistic. Patronage of the arts was a strategic move, a way for wealthy Romans to cement their social standing. By funding artists, they weren't just beautifying their homes. They were buying influence and ensuring their legacy endured long after they were gone. And let's not overlook the darker side of Roman patronage. While the elite enjoyed luxurious art and education, the system was inherently elitist. Patronage was a game of quid pro quo, where artists and intellectuals were often at the mercy of their patrons' whims. This relationship was less about nurturing talent and more about maintaining the status quo. If an artist's work didn't align with a patron's political agenda, they could find themselves out in the cold, their frescoes left to fade into obscurity. As the afternoon sun begins to cast long shadows across the villa's courtyard, let's venture into the realm of Roman entertainment. You might think of gladiators or chariot races, but within the villa, entertainment took on a more refined guise. Picture a gathering of Rome's finest minds, indulging in a symposium, a meeting of the minds over diluted wine and philosophical debate. These gatherings were intellectual sparring matches, where rhetoric and wit were the weapons of choice. But don't be fooled by the civilized veneer. These debates could be as cutthroat as any gladiatorial contest. The symposium wasn't just about flexing intellectual muscle. It was an opportunity to forge alliances, sway opinions, and occasionally humiliate a rival with a particularly scathing retort. It was a microcosm of Roman society, where the battle for influence played out not in the arena, but in the drawing room. And just like in the arena, the stakes were high. A misstep could mean social ruin, while a well-timed quip could elevate one's status overnight. So, as you wander through the villa, soaking in the art and intellectual pursuits, remember that beneath the polished surface lies a world as strategic as it is cultured. The Roman villa is a stage where every scroll, statue, and debate serves a purpose, reinforcing the delicate balance of power and prestige. It's a reminder that in Rome, culture was as much about survival as it was about enlightenment. And as we leave this cerebral oasis, ready to delve deeper into the villa's mysteries, keep in mind that the story of Roman intellectual life is far from over. The villa is a living testament to the complexities of a society that revered both philosophy and power, art and ambition. So, stay tuned as we continue to unravel the layers of this ancient world, where every fresco, every scroll, and every whispered debate holds a clue to the past. As the last rays of sunlight retreat over the terracotta rooftops, the villa's atmosphere shifts from intellectual rigor to a more leisurely vibe. Evening in a Roman villa isn't just about lounging around and counting your sestertii. It's a carefully curated spectacle. You see, the Romans understood the art of unwinding was as vital as the art of war. So, let's dive into the evening's entertainment menu, where leisure is served with a side of societal insight. First up, let's talk family dynamics. Forget the modern sitcom version of family life. The Roman familia is an intricate web of power and duty. The paterfamilias, think head honcho and CEO of the household, holds absolute authority. His word is law, both in the family dining room and the estate's farthest vineyard. But don't let that patriarchal image fool you into thinking Roman family life was all stiff togas and stern lectures. Women played a surprisingly significant role, often managing household affairs and even influencing political ventures. Picture them as the behind-the-scenes producers of a Roman drama, ensuring everything runs smoothly while the paterfamilias take center stage. Evenings often include storytelling sessions, a cherished tradition where history, myth, and a bit of strategic embellishment blend into an oral tapestry. These aren't just stories for entertainment. They're lessons in morality, identity, and the eternal struggle for glory. A good tale could elevate a family's status, turning ancestors into legends and setting familial expectations sky high. But remember, history is written by the victors, or in this case, recited by the ones with the best memory and the most creative flair. As the villa's lamps flicker to life, casting a warm glow across moss-caked floors, we find another staple of Roman relaxation, the convivium. Think of it as a dinner party with philosophical flair. Guests recline on couches, indulging in food and conversation, and the evening unfolds like a well-orchestrated play. Here, convivium isn't just about sustenance. It's a stage where social alliances are forged and tested over courses of exotic dishes and flasks of wine. The conversations flow as freely as the libations, touching on everything from local politics to philosophical debates. If you ever wondered where Roman senators sharpened their rhetoric, it's right here, amidst the aroma of roasted meats and the clinking of cups. But let's not ignore the elephant, or rather, the slave, in the room. While the villa's owner revels in leisure, there's an army of unseen hands ensuring everything runs smoothly. The disparity couldn't be starker. Slaves work tirelessly behind the scenes, their labor underpinning the opulence. The villa, with its grandeur and grace, is a microcosm of Roman society, where luxury for some is built upon the relentless toil of others. It's a paradox that underscores Roman life. The pursuit of leisure is deeply entwined with the reality of exploitation. Yet, the allure of villa life is hard to resist. The romance of reclining under the stars, surrounded by art and intellect, is undeniably enticing. but peel back the layers, and you'll find a society grappling with the same issues that echo through history: inequality, power dynamics, and the eternal quest for prestige. The villa is a living testament to the contradictions of Roman civilization, its splendor and its scars. As the evening winds down, let's reflect on the broader societal implications of this villa life. Leisure, in the Roman context, isn't just a personal indulgence, it's a political statement. The villa's grandeur reinforces the owner's social standing, a tangible representation of power. But it's also a reminder of the empire's fragility. The leisure of the few is sustained by the labor of the many, a precarious balance that can tip with the slightest disturbance. Moreover, the villa's role extends beyond its marble walls. It's a hub of economic activity, a cultural beacon, and a symbol of Roman ambition. As such, it reflects the empire's values: innovation, dominance, and expansion, often at a significant human cost. Wrapping up our journey through this Roman day, we're left with the legacy of the villa as a complex tapestry of history. It's a place where luxury and labor coexist, where the past and present intertwine, and where the human condition is laid bare in all its complexity. The villa, with its contradictions and charms, offers a mirror to our own times, a reminder that the pursuit of greatness, in any era, comes with its own set of challenges and compromises. As you drift into sleep, consider the layers of history we've uncovered together. The Roman villa, with its opulence and its shadows, has more to tell than meets the eye. It's a story of ambition and aspiration, of power and privilege, and of a society that, in many ways, mirrors our own. So here's to the Romans, masters of innovation, architects of empire, and pioneers in the art of living well. May their legacy, with all its lessons and legends, continue to inspire and provoke for generations to come. The Shang Dynasty, folks, wasn't exactly a utopian society, skipping merrily through fields of prosperity. Picture more of a crumbling empire teetering on the edge of a very steep cliff. By the late 11th century BCE, the Shang were an empire in decline, where economic disparities were as glaring as a neon sign in Times Square. The rich were rich, the poor were, well, poorer than a church mouse's second cousin. The economic chasm was so wide that if you tried to jump it, you'd need a jetpack and a prayer. Politically, the Shang court was a circus of corruption that would make modern politicians blush. Picture a bunch of nobles, each with an ego bigger than the last, squabbling over power like kids fighting over the last slice of pizza. The king, Daizin, was about as popular as a porcupine in a balloon factory, known for his tyrannical rule and extravagant lifestyle. His idea of a good time, lavish feasts, and building himself a lake of wine. Because why sip from a cup when you can swim in a vat of your favorite vintage? The people, predictably, weren't thrilled about footing the bill for his royal bacchanalia. Social unrest was simmering like an over-boiling pot of rice. The common folk were taxed into oblivion, working their fingers to the bone to provide for a monarchy that couldn't care less about their plight. Rebellion wasn't just inevitable, it was on the calendar. When you push the populace to the brink, they're going to push back, and that's exactly what the Zhou had been waiting for. Enter the Zhou clan, stage left, with King Wen as the brains behind the operation. King Wen was the kind of guy who could see the writing on the wall, a wall scrawled with the Shang are toast. A shrewd leader and strategist, Wen was quietly building alliances and gathering support, like a chess player planning 5 moves ahead. His charm offensive, coupled with the Shang's self-destructive tendencies, set the stage for something big. But Wen didn't live to see the climax of his master plan. That job fell to his son, King Wu, who picked up the baton and ran with it like an Olympic sprinter. King Wu wasn't just a chip off the old block. He was the block, the chip, and the whole darn lumberyard. With a knack for warfare and a keen sense of timing, Wu seized the moment when the Shang were at their weakest. Before the Zhou could take the throne, they needed a good excuse, a divine one. Enter the mandate of heaven, ancient China's version of "because I said so," but with celestial flair. The idea was that the gods gave their blessing to a just ruler, and if things went south, it meant the gods revoked their favor. It was a neat way to justify overthrowing a corrupt regime, like sticking a heavens-approved sticker on a new ruler's forehead. The appeal of the mandate of heaven was undeniable. It was a divine rubber stamp for political upheaval, and it resonated with a populace hungry for change. But let's not kid ourselves. this wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. The reality was gritty, bloody, and filled with warfare. When King Wu's forces clashed with the Shang at the Battle of Mui around 1046 BCE, it wasn't an epic showdown of heroes, but a brutal fight that saw many Shang troops defecting or outright refusing to fight. Why? Because fighting for a leader who throws wine parties while you starve isn't the most motivating cause. It wasn't just the battlefield that sealed the Shang's fate. It was the disillusionment of their own people, the erosion of loyalty that comes when leaders forget their subjects. The Zhou didn't just win a battle. They won the hearts of those who had grown weary of corruption and excess. They were the fresh start everyone was secretly hoping for, like a new season of a favorite show after a cliffhanger. Yet the romance of the Mandate often glosses over the raw ambition and strategic cunning that fueled the Zhou's rise. This was as much about power as it was about providence, a blend of divine endorsement and human determination. And while the Mandate was a brilliant PR move, the Zhou's success was rooted in their ability to read the room, play the long game, and strike when the iron was hard. So, while the Mandate of Heaven makes for a killer headline, it was the Zhou's savvy navigation of economic woes, political chaos, and social unrest that truly paved their path to power. They weren't just handed the keys to the kingdom. They took them, with King Wen and King Wu leading the charge in a coup that was as strategic as it was celestial. So, the Zhou had the Mandate of Heaven on their side, or at least they'd convinced the masses that they did. But let's not pretend a divine decree alone could dismantle a dynasty. The real work happened in the trenches, or more accurately, on the dusty plains at the Battle of Mui in 1046 BCE. Now, this was the clash that put the POW in power struggle. Here's the kicker. The Zhou were outnumbered. Yeah, King Wu and his troops faced off against an army that could have swarmed them like ants at a picnic. The Shang forces were supposedly around 70,000 strong, while the Zhou mustered about 50,000. Not exactly Vegas odds, but King Wu had a few tricks up his sleeve. First, the Zhou exploited something more potent than numbers: morale. Shang soldiers, drained by years of fighting for a despised king, weren't exactly brimming with enthusiasm. Imagine being asked to fight for a guy who'd rather build wine lakes than bridges. Many of them defected to the Zhou side or simply refused to lift a finger. It's hard to wave a sword when your heart's not in it right. Wu's strategy was less about brute force and more about psychological warfare. He didn't need to defeat every soldier. He just needed the Shang troops to feel defeated. But let's not sugarcoat it. Warfare wasn't some gleaming, noble endeavor. This wasn't a Hollywood epic with slow-motion battles and stirring speeches. It was gritty, chaotic, and harsh. The Zhou had to navigate the messy logistics of moving and feeding an army. Picture trying to organize a massive tailgate party, but for thousands of soldiers who also happened to be carrying weapons. The Zhou had to keep their troops supplied with food and provisions. Spoiler alert, this wasn't a time of spam emails and next-day delivery. No, they relied on a network of supply lines stretching across hostile territory. Just imagine trying to ship enough grain and meat to keep 50,000 bellies full, while also dodging the Shang forces and their allies. And speaking of allies, King Wu was a master at forging strategic partnerships. His father, King Wen, had laid the groundwork, but Wu sealed the deal by convincing neighboring tribes and disgruntled Shang vassals to join the fray. Wu didn't just bolster his numbers. He built a coalition of the willing, or at least the dissatisfied. It was like assembling a team of superheroes, but instead of capes and tights, they wore armor and carried swords. The Zhou's ability to unite various factions under a common banner was a stroke of genius, even if it was driven by desperation and necessity. Now, let's get down to brass tacks. Warfare is expensive. Funding an army wasn't just a matter of asking nicely. The Zhou had to cobble together resources, often through alliances that involved promises of loot and favorable post-war arrangements. This was an ancient version of I owe you one, with the stakes being life and death. The economic burden was immense, but the promise of a new, fairer rule was a powerful motivator, not to mention the allure of Shang treasures ripe for the taking. The romance of the Mandate of Heaven sometimes glosses over these realities. It paints a picture of a divine plan unfolding seamlessly, but the truth is messier and more human. The Zhou didn't just inherit a kingdom, they fought tooth and nail for it, using every tool at their disposal, from divine PR to strategic cunning. The Shang's defeat wasn't just a military loss. It was a collapse of confidence, a failure to inspire loyalty in their own ranks. And while history books might celebrate the Battle of Mui as a turning point, let's not forget the countless unnamed soldiers, the logistical masterminds working behind the scenes, and the cunning diplomats who brokered crucial alliances. This was a team effort, a symphony of strategy and circumstance that allowed the Zhou to turn the tide. As the dust settled on the battlefield, the Zhou emerged victorious, not just because they were the better fighters, but because they understood the power of perception and politics. They knew that to rule, you needed more than just a crown. You needed a cause, a narrative that resonated with the people. The mandate of heaven wasn't just a celestial endorsement. It was a rallying cry for change, a promise of a better tomorrow. Of course, the Zhou's victory was just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead in transforming a war-torn landscape into a thriving dynasty. But that, my friends, is a story for another day. Stay tuned, because the rise of the Zhou is a saga of ambition, innovation, and a little bit of luck, all wrapped up in the tapestry of history. With the Shang dynasty in the rearview mirror and victory fresh on their minds, the Zhou faced a daunting task, transforming a chaotic battlefield into a cohesive kingdom. King Wu and his crew had to figure out how to govern a sprawling empire that would make a jigsaw puzzle look like a breeze. It wasn't just a matter of planting a flag and calling it a day. To keep control over a territory stretching over 5 million square kilometers, the Zhou had to get creative. And by creative, I mean they had to invent the feudal system, an arrangement that was part genius, part gamble, and all Zhou. Feudalism, in Zhou terms, wasn't about knights in shining armor prancing around on horseback. Nope, this was about delegation, pure and simple. Picture a massive org chart with King Wu at the top, doling out chunks of land to loyal relatives and trusted allies. In return, these new local rulers, let's call them vassals, pledged their loyalty and military support. It was like a franchise model, but instead of burgers and fries, they were serving up governance and defense. Each vassal ran their territory like a mini-kingdom, complete with its own set of rules and responsibilities. This was decentralization on steroids, and it was the secret sauce that kept the Zhou from imploding. But let's not romanticize this too much. Feudalism wasn't all banquets and back-patting. It was a political seesaw where balance was everything. If a vassal got too powerful or too ambitious, they could start eyeing the throne with a little too much enthusiasm. This is where those strategic alliances and marriages came into play. The Zhou were matchmakers with an agenda, marrying off daughters to vassal families to cement alliances and keep everyone on the same page, or at least in the same book. Take, for example, the marriage alliances with the Jiang and Lu clans. These were not just about love and wedding bells. They were cold, calculated moves to lock down loyalty and ensure no one got any funny ideas about independence. It was like a game of chess, where each marriage was a strategic move, aimed at securing the Zhou's power base. And if a vassal dared to step out of line, you bet King Wu had a backup plan. The threat of military intervention was never far from the table, ensuring that everyone played nicely, or else. Economically, the Zhou had to make sure this whole setup didn't collapse under its own weight. Remember, this was a time when economic policy involved more than just crunching numbers. It was about survival. The Zhou implemented a system of tribute. Vassals sent a portion of their agricultural produce and goods back to the central government. This wasn't just about filling the royal coffers. It was about creating a web of interdependence. If the vassals prospered, so did the Zhou, and vice versa. It was a clever way to ensure that loyalty wasn't just a matter of honor, but of economic necessity. Yet, the effectiveness of Zhou feudalism is up for debate. Sure, it worked like a charm at first, but as the years rolled on, cracks began to show. The system relied heavily on the personal relationships between the king and his vassals, which was great while those relationships were strong. But as power changed hands, the bonds weakened. Vassals started to feel more like autonomous rulers than loyal subjects, and the Zhou court had to juggle more factions than a high school drama club. And here's the kicker. While the mandate of heaven was a great way to justify overthrowing a dynasty, it was a double-edged sword. If the guards could revoke their support from the Shang, who's to say they wouldn't do the same to the Zhou? The mandate was a constant reminder that the Zhou had to keep their ducks in a row, or risk becoming yesterday's news. This divine pressure cooker kept everyone on their toes, ensuring that complacency never set in. So, what kept the Zhou from unraveling entirely? A mix of savvy governance, strategic alliances, and some good old-fashioned luck. They knew that to maintain power, they couldn't just rely on force or divine favor. They needed a system that could adapt and evolve, a government that could bend without breaking. And for a time, it worked. The Zhou managed to create a stable, prosperous society, one that thrived on agricultural surplus and trade. The Zhou's economic policies were as much about vision as they were about pragmatism. They encouraged agriculture, knowing that a well-fed population was less likely to rebel. They promoted trade, understanding that a flow of goods meant a flow of ideas and innovation. And they established a hierarchy that, while imperfect, kept the peace more often than not. But let's not kid ourselves. This was no utopia. The Zhou feudal system, with its layers of authority and obligation, was a maze of politics and power plays. It was a system that required constant vigilance, a delicate dance of give and take. And while it held the empire together, it also laid the groundwork for future conflicts. The seeds of discord were sown in the very fabric of the feudal structure, waiting for the right, or wrong, moment to sprout. The Zhou's consolidation of power and establishment of their feudal system was a masterclass in governance, a testament to their ability to adapt and innovate. But it was also a reminder that power is a fickle friend, one that requires constant attention and care. As the Zhou dynasty moved forward, they would face challenges that would test their mettle and define their legacy. And while the mandate of heaven provided a divine seal of approval, it was the Zhou's earthly strategies, their marriages, alliances, and economic policies that truly held the empire together. The dynasty's story is one of ambition and ingenuity, a tale of how a group of outsiders rose to power and built a system that, for all its flaws, managed to endure. The Zhou's legacy is one of complexity and contradiction, a reminder that history is never as simple as it seems. And this chapter, my friends, is just the beginning. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the saga of the Zhou, exploring the triumphs and tribulations that shaped ancient China. So, as the Zhou dynasty settled into the driver's seat of ancient China, they weren't just content to rule by club and crown. No, they went full-on cerebral, crafting a cultural and philosophical landscape that would make any Renaissance fair look like a backyard BBQ. Enter the mandate of heaven, an ideological power play that was as much about cosmic diplomacy as it was a political masterstroke. Let's break it down. The mandate of heaven wasn't just a divine thumbs up. No, it was the Zhou's way of saying, hey, we're in charge because the universe says so. If the guards were the casting directors, the Zhou were the actors who nailed the audition. This wasn't some vague mumbo-jumbo. It was a robust political doctrine that justified their overthrow of the Shang and kept their vassals in line, like the ultimate celestial endorsement deal. The genius of the mandate was its flexibility. It was like a cosmic Swiss army knife, adaptable to any situation. If a ruler was just and the kingdom thrived, then great, the mandate was theirs. If things went south, famine, floods, rebellion, well, it was time to reevaluate who heaven really favored. This kept everyone, from kings to commoners, on their toes. It was a neat blend of accountability and divine right, making sure rulers knew they could end up as yesterday's news faster than a viral video. But here's where things get truly juicy. The Zhou didn't just stop at a heavenly mandate. They were also laying the groundwork for some serious philosophical heavyweights. Confucius, the granddaddy of Chinese philosophy, wasn't exactly strolling the Zhou halls yet. He'd pop up a few centuries later, but the seeds of his teachings were already being sowed. The Zhou period was like a philosophical happy hour, where the ideas of duty, morality, and proper governance were the main course. Confucian ideals would eventually champion virtues like filial piety, respect for elders, and the importance of education, all great stuff. But let's not romanticize it too much. Zhou society, in reality, was less about harmonious living and more about survival of the shrewdest. The nice Confucian ideal of benevolent rulers didn't always match up with the Zhou's realpolitik. Rulers had to be as cunning as they were caring, more like chess players than saintly figures. It's like this. While Confucius might have envisioned rulers as sage-like figures, many Zhou kings were more like CEOs, balancing spreadsheets of power, alliances, and resources. The Confucian dream was a bit like a screensaver, nice to look at, but not always what's really going on behind the scenes. The Zhou leaders were savvy operators, navigating through a maze of political intrigue, rivalries, and the ever-looming threat of insurrection. Yet, Confucian philosophy wasn't all head-in-the-clouds idealism. It shaped political thought in ways that were surprisingly pragmatic. The idea that rulers should lead by example and that governance should be based on virtue rather than force was revolutionary. It was like pitching a new management style where the boss actually has to be competent and ethical. Mind-blowing, right? And while the Zhou might not have always lived up to these high standards, the philosophical groundwork laid during their reign would echo through Chinese history for millennia. It was the ultimate long game, a testament to the power of ideas to outlast the people who first dreamed them up. Economically, the Zhou also knew how to play their cards right. They weren't just rulers, they were economic strategists, ensuring that the empire's coffers were as full as a dumpling at New Year's. They encouraged agricultural innovation, figuring out that a well-fed populace was less likely to revolt. The introduction of iron plows and improved irrigation techniques wasn't just about farming, it was about solidifying power. Feeding the masses was like an insurance policy against rebellion. Moreover, trade routes expanded under the Zhou, turning the kingdom into an ancient hub of commerce. The famed Silk Road might not have been fully open for business yet, but the Zhou were already wheeling and dealing, establishing networks that would later link China to the wider world. This wasn't just about goods. It was about cultural exchange, the spread of ideas, and yes, more than a few spies and secrets. And here's a fun twist. While we're on the subject of myths and legends, let's talk about how the Zhou themselves became the stuff of legend. Their rise and rule were chronicled in texts like the Book of Documents, and later, the records of the Grand Historian. These weren't just dusty tomes. They were the ancient equivalent of blockbuster epics, blending fact with fiction, heroes with history. The Zhou became larger than life, their story embellished with tales of divine dragons and heavenly omens. Of course, this myth-making wasn't just for kicks. It was a powerful tool for cementing their legacy, ensuring that the story of their rule was as grand and glorious as possible. It's the old adage, history is written by the victors, and the Zhou were nothing if not victorious in the game of historical spin. Yet, for all their success, the Zhou were acutely aware that the mandate of heaven was a double-edged sword. Just as they had used it to topple the Shang, it could be wielded against them. This was no time for complacency. The Zhou needed to keep innovating, governing wisely, and above all, keeping the guards on their side, or at least keeping up appearances. In the end, the Zhou's blend of philosophical innovation, economic savvy, and political acumen was a winning combination. They were a dynasty that understood the power of ideas, the importance of perception, and the necessity of practicality. Their legacy is a testament to the complexity of history, where myth and reality intertwine, and where the grand narratives often hide the gritty details. So, as we wrap up this chapter, remember, the Zhou were more than just rulers. They were architects of a cultural and philosophical landscape that would shape China for centuries. Their story isn't just about battles and borders. It's about the power of ideas to transform society. And while we might be tempted to view them through the rose-tinted glasses of history, it's worth peeking over the rims to see the reality beneath. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the saga of the Zhou, exploring the triumphs and tribulations that shaped ancient China. There's more to discover, more myths to bust, and more stories to tell. Zhou dynasty might have started with a mandate, but their legacy is one of enduring influence, an epic tale that continues to captivate and challenge us today. But dear listeners, the late Zhou period wasn't just a stroll through sunlit fields with philosophy books in hand and prosperity on the horizon. It was more like trying to juggle flaming swords while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. The very systems that had propelled the Zhou to greatness began to show cracks. Big, ominous ones that you could drive a chariot through. By the time we hit the Eastern Zhou period, around 770 BCE, things were looking less like a well-oiled machine and more like a soap opera with too many plot twists. The Zhou's once mighty feudal system had turned into a game of who wants to be king, with vassals vying for power like it was the last piece of cake at a banquet. The decentralization that had initially been their strength now became their Achilles heel, as regional lords grew more powerful and independent. It's like they forgot the memo about loyalty and decided to start their own spin-offs. Let's talk numbers. During the spring and autumn period, 770-476 BCE, there were over 140 states, each with its own ambitions and agendas. That's more states than in a modern-day European Union meeting, and about as easy to manage as a cat convention. The Zhou king was reduced to a figurehead, a ceremonial relic rather than a commanding monarch. In reality, power was as fragmented as a dropped vase, with pieces scattering all across the land. The Warring States period, 475-221 BCE, cranked the chaos up to 11. Imagine a free-for-all where 7 major states, yes, 7, decided to duke it out for supremacy. This wasn't a friendly game of chess. It was more like a high-stakes poker game where everyone was bluffing and the chips were lives. The Zhou, meanwhile, were the bemused spectators to their own disintegration, holding onto their crown but not much else. Economically, things were a mixed bag. The good news: agriculture was booming, thanks to iron tools and advanced farming techniques. The bad news: all that prosperity fueled the ambitions of the regional warlords. The wealth that should have strengthened the central government instead bankrolled endless military campaigns. It's like using your bonus check to buy fireworks for a neighborhood feud. The irony was thicker than the smog of battle. The Zhou's downfall wasn't just political or economic. It was a social unraveling, too. The philosophical ideals of Confucianism and Taoism, which had once offered a blueprint for harmony, were twisted into justifications for power grabs and territorial squabbles. Confucius might have preached about benevolent rulers and social order, but in the late Zhou, it seemed like everyone had missed the lecture on ethics. And let's not forget the mandate of heaven, our old friend that gave the Zhou their divine right to rule. The late Zhou rulers watched as this once hallowed concept was tossed around like a hot potato. Every time a new state gained the upper hand, it claimed the mandate, turning it into more of a political football than a celestial decree. The divine endorsement lost its luster, reduced to a convenient excuse rather than a guiding principle. Yet, in the midst of this chaos, the Zhou left a lasting legacy, one that would echo through Chinese history like a gong in a quiet hall. Their contributions to political thought, culture, and philosophy would outlive their reign by centuries. The writings and philosophies that emerged during this period, despite, or perhaps because of, the turmoil, laid the groundwork for the future. The Zhou dynasty may have ended with a whimper rather than a bang, but its influence was anything but quiet. The myth of the Zhou, with its mandate of heaven and philosophical innovations, holds an enduring appeal. It's a saga of rise and fall, of human ambition and divine intervention. It's the story of how a group of shrewd leaders turned the tide of history and how their successors struggled to maintain that legacy. It's a reminder that power is both fleeting and enduring, that the structures we build can both support us and bring us down. So, as we wrap up this journey through the Zhou dynasty, remember this. History is a tapestry woven from both facts and fables, strength and fragility. The Zhou were architects of their own destiny, builders of a legacy that went beyond their own time. They remind us that while we might be tempted to view history through the lens of romantic legend, it's the gritty, human realities that truly shape the world. As we move on to other tales and times, let's carry with us the lessons of the Zhou, their triumphs, their trials, and the timeless truths they leave behind.